we waiting for? Good morning and welcome to the first safeguarding of the new year. Right. Start off with apologies, item 1.
We have apologies this morning, Chair, from Mrs Burnett Faulkner and Mrs Eagland, who are unwell, and then Mrs Edgeler as well.
Thank you. Item 2, any declarations of interest? No. Item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of November. I trust everyone has seen a copy and had an opportunity to read through them. Are people happy that I signed them as a true and accurate record? All right, yeah, if you could do that, yeah.
Mrs Eagland has sent a message this morning with her apologies, 2 issues on the minutes. She wants to formally congratulate the enforcement officers on trading standards for the marvellous job they've been doing over vaping. We had that item to the last meeting, and there's been several examples on the national news highlighting that. So she wanted to formally congratulate them. And also, she's asked whether or not there's been follow-up yet with the district and boroughs. We were going to write asking them to look at the issue of vaping in planning restrictions. That's something that we intend to do in the new year in consultation with Mr Northcote. Okay.
Thank you for that. Item 4, and the first item, homes for children in our care. I think there's a separate report on that. Hopefully most people have seen that. Councillor Sutton.
Good morning, Chairman, and a happy New Year to everyone. And I hope everyone had a good Christmas and are well refreshed. So, homes for 2 items this morning. Both of them, the homes for children in our care, and then the following item, we both have presentations. So, in relation to homes for children in our care, particularly, I've got Natasha, RAD for Partnership and Wellbeing, who you all know from previous meetings, and Shai, who I'm not sure whether you do know, who's helped to prepare this report. There is a presentation, so I won't go through the report in too much detail to start with, and allow Natasha to present that. But members will know that our primary aim, and this sort of introduction goes for both the papers this morning, our primary aim is to try our hardest to work with families and children to keep them at home where it is safe to do so. Failing that, and when children do have to go into care, going into foster care and being in a loving home would be our #1 priority. But there are occasions where children do need to go into residential home for various reasons. And as members will know, the vast majority of those residential homes are done with private providers. We don't always get the best outcomes for children in these residential homes, and also costs can be high, and we do have difficulty in placing children within Staffordshire, which is interesting because there is sufficiency of private providers, if we could, to cover all the children we have in care in residential homes within Staffordshire. So we've been looking at ways in which we can readdress that, and one of those is around how we could change and challenge that market a little bit, and that's what the majority of this presentation is about. So, Mr. Chairman, if you're happy, I'll hand over to Natasha, that will take you and all of us through this report.
Good morning, everybody, and also Happy New Year to you all. So I will just canter through, if that's okay, and I'm going to slightly rejig the order I'm going to do this in, if that's all right. So I just want to set this in a bit of a context, really, because we've come with 3 asks today. So just for you who aren't aware and kind of knee-deep in this day in, day out, Actually, there's a real kind of crisis happening amongst children's care placements nationally. There are not enough care placements to meet the number of children that are coming into care at the current rate. And actually what we've got is an inequity of provision. So you've got a lot of children travelling up and down the country, not necessarily accessing local provision. So for example, Staffordshire is an affordable place to live. So a lot of residential providers will set up here, but actually the children who live here aren't necessarily from Staffordshire. So we've got a bit of a melting pot really happening nationally, of which Staffordshire is kind of impacted by. So the government, including the Department for Education, are aware of this problem. It's been something that's been cited in their recent paper, Stable Homes Built on Love, and they are trying to do some work around what they can do nationally to support us. But actually, Staffordshire knows that we need to act quickly to address that for our children now, and we can't necessarily wait for the government's kind of change in direction to keep pace with what we need to do. So a couple of things that they are doing that it might be helpful to know about. So one of the ways that they're suggesting that we can try and fix the broken market is work better as a region. So they're suggesting something called the regional care collaboratives. So they are trying to work with 2 local areas to test the regional care collaborative model. They welcomed applications just before Christmas, and they hope to tell the places that are going to be successful that they'll be successful in the new year. So we're hoping to hear sometime in January. The West Midlands did apply, and actually could be a Pathfinder area, as could other areas. And they're going to use that really to test new ways of working on a regional footprint. They suggest that working on a regional footprint will get much better buying power because you've got much higher number of children that we're talking about. So unlike adults, where you're talking about high volumes of older people, in children's places, the number of children needing residential care, for example, in Staffordshire might be something as little as 90 children. So it's not really that big a number to give you that buying power within that market. So that's one of the reasons why they think working regionally will work for us better. What we do already have, though, in the West Midlands, which is not necessarily the same in all of the regions, is that we have an already established regional commissioning hub. So that's something that all of the DCSs across the 14 West Midlands local authorities pay into every year, but there is only 4 staff currently who work in that commission hub. So the range of work they can do and undertake can sometimes be limited by the fact that they are only a small team. So they will help us with some regional frameworks, which we'll come on to talk about later, but actually their ability to kind of scale up and deliver the ambition for the regional care collaborative can be limited. However, what we know is that in Staffordshire, we're already overspent this year in terms of the placements budget. We know that the cost for children's care is rising, and therefore we need to act quicker. So we are absolutely playing our part in terms of those regional arrangements, but actually we need to do something much quicker locally. And again, a couple of other things that I thought it might be useful for you to know about nationally and regionally what's happening. Is that there was a recent report published by the LGA looking at Staffordshire's spend, and actually we're broadly a middle payer, so we're not too high and we're not too low, so it does mean that we're broadly getting good value. But what we're seeing is an increase in those children who we're calling the most complex children, and actually I don't think that's a really good title for those children, but it tends to be the top 10 most expensive placements that local authorities make. So again, there was a separate report that was done looking at the top 10 places that children were placed in. And actually what it found was the top price paid by a local authority was £63,000 a week. So that just gives you an idea of the scale of the challenge in terms of the cost of those places. I can assure you that Staffordshire doesn't pay anywhere near that, but actually it does make you realise, I suppose, when we're talking to providers about can I place with a child with you today, they'll be saying, well, I've got another local authority who are offering me £63,000 a week. So it does make it a really competitive market that we're working in. So because of all of those reasons, we wanted to come and talk to you about what are the things that we're doing locally to try and interrupt and disrupt that market. So just to give you an idea of the scale, we've included some information that might be helpful. So there are currently, well, there's less than 1383 children in our care today because of the work that Nisha and the team have been doing in terms of trying to reduce the number of children in care. But actually that just gives you an idea of how they're placed. So some of those children will be in independent foster carers, some of those will be in in-house foster carers, some of those will be placed with a relative or friend, and some of those will be in residential homes. As we said. So residential homes tend to be the most costly placement we can make, and actually there are very few children who normally require that type of care. So at the moment we've got 120 children in residential care homes, but actually only 88 of those children had residential care as their preferred place. Most of those children wanted foster care places. Some of those children wanted foster care places, but what we've got is inadequate foster care places, so some of those children end up in residential care. So it's really quite a complex market, but actually only a small number of children need residential homes, so that's actually quite positive. The amount of money we spend on children coming into care is expensive. It's 30 million in the last year. And as Mark alluded to in the introduction, most of the children are placed outside of Staffordshire. Yet I think we're probably the only authority in the country who've got sufficient places to meet demand. So we've currently got 500 beds in Staffordshire. We've only got 120 children who need those beds, yet most of those children are having to travel outside of the county because actually they don't necessarily take our children. And what we are finding is that quite often, because of the demands being placed on the system, the residential providers will go for the children who they deem to be easier. So that's why children sometimes travel further away from home than we would like. We've only got a small amount of internal homes, so we don't have much kind of in the way of being able to disrupt the market. We haven't got an alternative a lot of the time. And actually what we have seen is a decline in the number of foster carers. So just to put that in a context, in the West Midlands in the last 2 years, the number of internal foster carers has reduced by 30%. So that's significant. It's a massive reduction in terms of the number of foster carers coming into internal and local authority foster care places. So that's one of the reasons why we're seeing such a pressure really in that place. So there's a lot of things that we're doing to try and disrupt this, but hopefully that helps to set the context. But one of the things we did was last year we launched the sufficiency strategy. So every local authority has to have a sufficiency strategy, and that sufficiency strategy should tell the market what we're seeing in terms of the data, understanding our local area, the types of children that we think we might need to care for into the future, and it should give the sector some ideas of what we're seeing so that they're able to respond better. And we published that last year, and one of the things that we told the sector is that we could see that there were too many children placed out of Staffordshire, and we wanted to see more children placed locally. There were too many children where we had to make unlawful arrangements because actually there wasn't registered provision for those children. We didn't necessarily see the right children in the right place at the right time. So as I've just described, you might see some children who actually needed foster care being in residential care because there wasn't enough provision available. And we told them that actually we want as many of our children to return home where it's safe to do so, because we know that in Staffordshire sometimes children stay in our care too long. So we've been really clear with the market about what it is we're trying to do, and over the last 12 months we've been working very closely with them to understand what can we do better to affect change in those spaces. And so there's a couple of things that we wanted to talk to Cabinet about, but also yourselves today in terms of what we think we need to do. So as I said before, we work on a region, and that can be really helpful. It means that 14 local authorities don't necessarily have to go out and do foster care frameworks or residential frameworks independently, so you don't have 14 local authorities competing. Instead, we work as a region. So we've been working as a region for the last couple of years, and we've had a residential framework that cuts across all of the 14 local authorities. So all 14 local authorities buy into the same framework with the same group of providers using the same kind of standards and processes across the region. So that's been really positive for us. But that residential care framework does expire this year. So one of the asks of Cabinet is for us to continue to work on that residential care framework. We don't think, even if we do everything we can do, we'll ever not need residential care for some of these children outside of the local authority. And in all honesty, when we use that framework and we use it well, the external market can provide that care cheaper than a local authority, so it is worthwhile using. And we also know we've got some examples of some great residential care providers who provide some really high quality care for our children. So we think it's important that we continue to maintain that provision and continue to invest in it. One of the things that we're trying to do through that framework is address some of the issues that we've identified over the last couple of years while we've been working as a region. So we've seen an increase in the number of providers saying that they're not going to be part of the regional framework. And one of the reasons for that is because the price uplifts haven't kept pace with the changes in terms of the cost of living rises. So one of the things that we're trying to do through that framework is have a fair uplift process. So they're doing some work as a region now to try and look at how they can make sure that the uplift process keeps in line with inflationary rises. So that's something that the framework will do. So our recommendation to Cabinet is that we carry on using that residential care framework and we carry on investing in that type of care. But we also know that we still need some other options outside of external market. When we get to the top 10 most expensive children, as I just described, those children have often had a number of different moves, and actually the market is not well equipped to meet the needs of those children. And what we're finding now is a lot of local authorities are investing in internal provision. So they're looking at what other options can we have that aren't just the external market kind of being able to provide that care. So Shai and the team have done a piece of work over the last 6 months looking at what might be the options that the local authority could consider to try and disrupt this market, so that actually we've got a bigger share in that market and a bigger stake in that market, so that if we've got children who are really complex, we're able to meet their needs. And so what they've looked at is a number of different options. Most of these were discounted, mainly because of different reasons. So we looked at the investment in a LATCO, so a local authority traded company. And one of the reasons we looked at that is because actually the superannuation cost for staffing is much cheaper than if they're employed by the local authority. However, what we found out through the process was that actually 85% of the business has to come from Staffordshire. So the ability to trade and get that volume that we were talking about before would be limited through a LATCO, and so it doesn't necessarily have the same return on investment that you might get through a private company. We looked at relationships with registered social landlords. So we looked at, we had conversations with a number of registered social landlords about utilising their properties. I think the RSLs are keen to work with us, so organisations like Aspire Housing would be keen to work with us, but we're not necessarily sure that they've got the infrastructure support or would be able to cope when actually we've got tenancies that prove quite difficult. So we think that's more of a medium to long-term solution that we need to continue to look at. We also looked at strategic partnerships. So we've seen some local authorities invest in strategic partnerships, working with external providers like Bernardo's or Shaw Trust, where actually they've got into a partnership with that organisation and worked alongside them, so that there is that external provision, but they're kind of doing it in a different kind of relationship and contractual relationship with that person. But actually when we went out and did some soft market testing, because of the scale, again, there wasn't much appetite to do it. So we think if we needed to do that, again, it's something that we ought to consider on a regional footprint and not necessarily on a Staffordshire-only footprint. We also considered a block contract. We have also invested in a block contract last year that hasn't necessarily borne the fruits that we expected, particularly because the quality of the provision can be poorer. And actually there's not necessarily the appetite with that high costs in the providers. So when we went out to bid, we only got, I think, was it 2 applications from external providers? So actually the market is really limited. They see that as kind of really high risk and they're not necessarily prepared to take it on. And we also looked at an acquisition of an existing provider of children's homes, so an organisation that was selling its homes and whether or not we should acquire that property. But ultimately they were all discounted, and the one that came out the top, given we've done an incredible amount of work on the options, was the investment in internal run homes. And we have seen a number of authorities across West Midlands do this. So we've kind of put a lot of information in the paper, but the main thing we wanted to draw to your attention today was around the investment in the finance from a financial perspective. So we know that if we invest in internal provision, it will require some investment. We estimate that the outlay for that will be 2.5 million, and we plan to borrow that over a period of 40 years, so we would have to pay it back to local authority. We estimate that the annual running costs of that provision would be 3.5 million, and for us to break even and for it to be delivered at the same cost as it would be externally, we know that we've got to keep the occupancy at 85%, so that means it's got to be occupied 85% of the time to be able to break even. So actually we know that that's got to be something that we keep in mind throughout the running of the homes. We know that we could save money by investing in this provision, and we've looked at the cost of placing 12 children externally in independent provision, which is about £7,500 a week. So if we took that level, we're saying that actually it could be £500,000 saving. But actually we know that some of those children that we place externally can cost us more. So there is kind of a balancing act to do about the children that we take, the type of children we take, and the levels of occupancy to make sure that we can make that fit for purpose. But actually we think it stacks up in terms of the investment, and we think it could be, whilst it's only a small contribution to the overspend that we've got, it could be a way to try and remedy some of those overspends that we've currently got in place. And then the other thing that we think we need to do, and again this is similar to the residential framework, so we've got a regional fostering care framework. So for most children, they absolutely want, the first choice is normally a foster place, either through the local authority or through the external market. And because the reduction in the number of children coming through the internal provision, as we've just described, I think the reduction in Staffordshire is about 20%. When we look at the overall number, we're always going to need external foster carers through independent fostering agencies. So again, we know that when we purchase through the framework in place by the region, we get much better value for money. Again, what we have seen more recently is foster care providers almost seeing what's happening in the residential market and seeing this as an opportunity to hike their prices. So we know that buying through a framework is much better value. And we're keen to ensure that we keep as many people on that framework as possible. So again, doing it on that regional footprint helps us a lot. So again, one of the other recommendations in this report is that we continue to invest in that foster care framework to make sure that we've still got enough independent foster carers for children who need our care. Interestingly as well, the independent fostering agencies haven't seen the level of losses that we have internally. So we think keeping that fostering framework, again, is a really good way of keeping the providers on side and keeping that the maximum number of foster carers in the market. Again, one of the things that has been picked up and we do seek to address through the process is that we improve the uplift process, and that will be similar to the one that we suggested for the residential care framework. And I think that's it. So we are proposing to Cabinet and want your views on opening up 6 LA-run homes, joining the West Midlands framework for residential services and joining the West Midlands framework for foster care services.
Thank you for that. Councillor Sutton.
Can I just add something? I don't think it was mentioned. It may have been, and I may have missed it. And that's about how many children these homes actually take. You know, they're not large scale homes. They're only taking a small amount of children each.
Yeah. So what I would just say on that. So what we're aiming to do with the 6 homes is have much smaller homes. So traditionally, children's homes have been bigger. Again, if you have more children, you've got less kind of overheads if you have that high number of children. But because of the regulation through Ofsted, one of the things that quite often comes in the way of kind of placing some of our children is they have to match the children. So the registered manager of the setting has to be able to say, I think that Mark is suitable to live with Chai, and if he doesn't think that that's the case, then actually they won't match the children. So it makes it really difficult for us to match some of those children who we know have got really difficult behavioural needs to manage. So the homes that we're suggesting are much, much smaller. So they are 2 to 3 bed homes. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why the cost is high and the saving is lower, but actually it was targeted at those children who traditionally are harder to place in the external market.
Thank you. Just on that point, though, if they are small homes, I think it's 6 and they all house 2 people, don't they? Two young people. Is there a danger that this model only works if we have 85% occupancy, and with such a small number, it would be very easy, wouldn't it, for someone to decide that 2 young people couldn't live together, and then we end up with much lower than 85%, and does the model then start to cost us a lot more money?
Yeah, so that's a conversation actually Nisha and I had the other day when we took this paper through our management team. So I think there's a balance to be struck. So if you take the higher end children, so say the most expensive child that we currently place in Staffordshire, if we took that children and had it on single occupancy, you wouldn't need to run at the 85% because you're making a much better saving in terms of that cost per week. So I think it's a really fine balance, and it's something that needs to be managed very carefully, but there is absolutely a danger that if we don't get the levels of occupancy or we don't get the right types of children in there, it's no cheaper than the external market.
Just one other question just before I open it up. We've talked quite a lot about disrupting the market. I'm still unsure about what that strategy is. Are we trying to disrupt something? Because that gives me an impression that we're trying to create some sort of chaos in the market. Or are we trying to create a better value for money option for ourselves against a backdrop from, if I heard you right, that sometimes outsourcing is cheaper and better? How how do we benefit from disrupting something that we might want to use in the future? And I'm still not sure whether disrupting the market or creating chaos is perhaps the best way forward, unless, of course, I've misunderstood it.
Yeah, so in my personal opinion, the best market is a mixed market, one where you've got lots of options. At the moment, we've got too many external options and not enough internal options. So when it comes to bartering or to discussing with a provider, you know, I've got a child, I need a home for them. Actually, they've got all of the coins in the bag. We've got nothing to say, well, actually, no, we have got an alternative. So it makes it very difficult for us to be able to bargain on our behalf. So I think a number of local authorities over the last 5 years have disinvested in internal provision. And now we've seen the increase in the number of children coming into care. Actually, there needs to be a better mixed market so that we are in a position, I think, to get better value for money.
One last question before I open it up as well. Does this, or is this model about internal provision that is specifically for a specialist group or a needy group of young people, or is this a start of moving back towards care homes, or not care homes, young people's homes in a more broader sense? Because it did strike me with the costs there. If we buy 3 places and pay to refurbish them and the running costs, it still seems significantly cheaper than going to an external provider. So therefore, is there not a temptation, at least, to roll this out further to save ourselves more money, when actually that would be contravening what our objective of keeping young people at home is?
So broadly speaking, and I'm generalising massively here, an average child will cost us between £4,500 to £5,500 a week. Those children's needs can be met by the external market, and actually we can't do it cheaper ourselves. So for those type of children, I don't think it's necessarily within our interest to get into that space. The space where we struggle is for children whose costs start to rise up to about between 7.5 upwards. And it's where, it's generally speaking, where you've got teenagers, there's a mix between boys and girls, there tends to be some behavioural needs, possibly some mental health needs thrown in, and possibly some special educational needs and disabilities. And when the behaviour becomes quite complex and difficult for the setting to manage, they increase the cost to manage the risk. And so that's the space where I think the local authority is better placed to intervene. The numbers of children in our care who meet that criteria, you're probably talking 20 out of the 120 that are currently in residential provision.
Perhaps if I can just add a little bit to that, and what also we do find is quite often a lot of these young people will have had lots of placements. They move about. Then you have difficulty with another provider being able to wanting to take a child, particularly when, you know, they're national and they can almost pick what they want. Whereas if we go down this model, we will have the opportunity to keep those children closer to home. We will be able to monitor those outcomes a bit. Those moves hopefully will lessen, and the complexity will lessen, and we will be able to work with our aims to try and get those young people back into a family provision if it's appropriate. And of course they will be nearer to home as well, which helps as well. And that also helps with distance. Social workers may have to travel, and those other logistical things are probably not included in that save element of the model.
No, that sounds really sensible. Thank you for that. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you. I think disrupting a dysfunctional market can be quite creative, so I'm quite supportive of that. The issue about the need, or the feeling of the need to have these residential establishments within the county, is that a function of jurisdiction or of geography? Is it because the parents have to travel further to see them? Or is it because we feel that we have more control over what's going on if they're within our boundaries? Because we have a very long, thin county. So if we think about that, and think about the LATCO issue, because actually a wholly owned arm's length local authority trading company, which we know in adult health and care can be particularly cost effective, can work very well and have a very good culture within it. So the question to my mind is, if we've already got these regional hubs, have you explored the possibility of having a shared LATCO with adjoining local authorities, namely Shropshire, Derbyshire and Cheshire, for instance? Because I do take on board the business that having a few very small homes has the risk of creating substantial volatility. And that just expands the market a little, still makes it geographically doable and perhaps more stable, and yet at the same time one would hope that it could replicate the health and care LATCO, which has been particularly effective. That's my thought.
So in terms of the external LATCO being explored across multiple local authorities, it isn't something that we've considered currently. That isn't to say that we couldn't consider it in future. In fact, as part of the development of the Regional Care Collaborative application, one of the conversations that DCS has had was about their ability to function effectively when the Regional Commissioning Hub is currently housed by Coventry City Council. So I think they're at the early stages. I think the challenge you've got with that particular issue is the kind of the demographic that comes into it in terms of each DCS being responsible for their own kind of geographical boundary, and then that becomes quite complex to try and manage. So we haven't, but I know it is part of the ambition of the RCC, and I think it will come back in terms of being on the agenda. The issue in terms of local places for local children is twofold, really. I think there is a geographical one. You know, it's much better for children to be close to home. But I think also we can't underestimate when a child has kind of been removed from the parental home, the impact on that child from their perspective is significant. And as much as possible where it's safe to do so, you want that child to have some continuity in terms of the schools, the community, the relationships with peers. And actually we can't underestimate just how significant that is, especially when we're talking about kind of finding homes for children, because actually that's part of that stability, that's part of that security that kind of follows that child, really. So that's one of the main drivers for wanting them to be close to home, as well as the fact that, you know, it's better for us in terms of affordability. Like Mark said, you know, the social worker knows that community, knows that patch and can respond much better.
Thank you. Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Natasha. I suppose in an ideal world, we'd want to see more people stay in their own environment, in their own home, or more foster parents coming forward to do that, and reduce the number of people that we place outside of Staffordshire. There was a slide that you looked at earlier on that talked about, I just want to get some clarity, about in-house foster carers and independent foster carers. I just want to understand what the difference is, what that means. And then secondly, when we talked about the provision of these new homes and the assumption that they need to be occupied 85% of the time to meet the cost of actually providing it for us, is there then a risk that we may well be in a position whereby they're not at 85%, and then we're looking at our children within Staffordshire saying, well, actually, what's best for the child in this situation? Or I wouldn't like to think that we'd be thinking about the financial implication of actually, if we don't keep up to 85%, we're going to be financially in a worse position. Bearing in mind, you talk about a period of 40 years, I think, to repay the debt back, the borrowing back. And I just wondered whether there will be a balance as to whether we say, yeah, we're under 85%, so therefore we need to make sure that children in Staffordshire are placed in these homes because it's a cost-effective method for us, albeit is that the right thing for the child. So I think that's I'll just stop there if I can, Chair, on just those few questions, and please.
Yeah, perhaps if I can start, and then Natasha can come in to go to talk about in-house fostering and IFAs, independent fostering agencies. In-house is what it is. Those people come under our auspice. We place a child with that foster carer. They're paid by the county council each week for. They get their allowances, get the support from the county council, etc. With an independent an IFA, it is an independent organisation that comes along, and we place a child with that organisation, and they do the managing of the foster carer. They pay the foster carer, but of course what we pay the IFA is more than what we would be paying internally. And I'll let Natasha answer the other points.
So I think the assumption around the occupancy being at 85% is one that we need to take seriously, and by that I mean that we need to keep an eye on it and we need to make sure that we're monitoring it effectively. I don't think it's a reason necessarily for kind of placing children in or out of the setting. I think that's much more about the needs of the children. But I think what we're trying to say is that this home, the internal homes, would need to be designed in a way that actually the statement of purpose was really clear about the needs of the children that it was seeking to meet. And I do think there are enough children in Staffordshire, even with all of the modelling around children, reduction in the number of children coming into care, there's still going to be roughly 90 children. If we took 10% of that, which is what it currently is, there's still going to be enough children to need that type of provision. It does wholly depend, though, on the needs of the individual children. That's why the matching is so difficult. So I think it would be remiss of us not to kind of highlight that as a risk, but actually to say that we are talking about it. We're actively talking about it, like I said, and we will continue to monitor it and manage it as we move forward. If it comes into fruition and we have these homes and actually it doesn't meet the 85% occupancy, then there is a need for a conversation about what that needs to look like moving forward, isn't there? But I think it's worth taking the risk and investing in something to try and do something differently with these children as opposed to doing nothing, because all we're seeing over the last kind of 2-3 years is the prices going up and up and up, and the number of options internally going, not being available to us really. So it kind of feels like we haven't got an alternative, if I'm honest.
So do you want to come back, Councillor? Yeah, welcome.
Just two other points there, Natasha. On your recommendation, it talks about remaining within the West Midlands regional framework. Is that not dependent upon other authorities doing the same as well? And the same with the foster care, because if a lot of authorities decide not to, then obviously it's going to reduce the ability outside of within the West Midlands for us to actually have any bargaining power if we're only one of a few authorities.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons why the two frameworks have come what feels like relatively early when the framework doesn't expire till December 2024. It's because each of the 14 local authorities are currently taking this through their processes. In principle, we've got to sign up for all of the officers in the 14 local authorities to invest in it. However, they need to take it through the political cycle. So that's the reason why it's coming so early. So I would say no reason at this moment in time, unless there's something that happens through the political processes, why all 14 wouldn't be investing in those frameworks, which is why we're suggesting to Staffordshire it is the right way to go. But again, there was, all of the local authorities were on the old framework, so there's no reason to suggest that they wouldn't be on the new framework currently.
Thank you. Councillor Snape.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Natasha and Councillor Sutton. I hate being the eternal pessimist, but can I just, a few questions. With this, are we now saying that transformation process has failed? That we've wasted the money on it, is my first question. The second one is, you said value for money, Natasha. We put many millions into the transformation process. When we started 5 years ago, we had about 1,200 children in care. And on the figures, we've down to about 900 now. You've now said there's, was it 1,383? In other words, nearly 500 above what we should be. So to me, transformation has failed. You now want over £2.3 million over, was it 40 years? So why putting that in? Is it just further waste of money? The 14 local authorities we're going to work with, have we checked their financial viability out? How many of those could go bust and leave us in dire straits? Is one of them Birmingham for a start? Is it Nottingham? I don't know what they are. Have we looked at their things so they can keep putting money into the system? You say we don't pay 63,000. Can you tell me what the highest figure we've paid, please, for one child? So we know how close we're coming to that. I mean, you said value for money. I say, I don't think it's value for money. Just keep changing every time. I mean, this process, well, I've heard there, I think I've heard it 5 times now, all very, very similar over the last 5 years, really, saying that if we don't do this immediately, we're not going to manage. When are we going to get the children out of care system? We said transformation was going to do that, but it just keeps going up, I'm sorry. So I think I'll leave it at that, really.
So I think I'll start with that point. So within transformation, there was nothing in transformation whatsoever about providers and this type of thing, where children were located, whether they were in foster care, whether they were in IFAs, whether we had a framework. Transformation was not about the placement of children and where children were. That wasn't at all part of the process. So from that, the fact that we're trying to go down this line is, I think, a result of what has happened nationally over a period of time, in the fact that local authorities over the past 20 plus years have disinvested in local provision, because at that time it was probably the right and appropriate thing to do. But now we have seen providers able to take hold of the market to a certain extent, be able to dictate to local authorities and put them in a position so that we have to take this sort of action. Now, this isn't the first time this paper, type of paper, has come through Cabinet. Our most recent care home that we've opened is a very similar type model to this. That went through scrutiny, that went through Cabinet, and we started to do that. And in fact, in that, we had authority to carry on and do this type of thing, but we feel it was appropriate that we looked at other options and not just running them ourselves, and whether there were options to do that in a different way, hence the work we've done around the LATCO, taking over an existing provider, working with social landlords, all that type of thing. This point is an ever-moving thing, and I firmly believe that we have to move with what we do, and we can't not do anything and just rely on the market. So transformation was not about where the children were going to be placed. Transformation was a way in which we worked on a different model, on a district model, better with partners, having less handovers between teams, having a district lead who has control, more control over what happens in the district. The placing of children was not necessarily within transformation. But I do take the point, that part of transformation, one of the aims of transformation was to have less children in care, and on the face of it, that hasn't worked. However, over the last 12 months, the amount of children that are not unaccompanied children seeking asylum has dropped. I think in the last 8 months, there was only 1 month where it's gone up. So we're very much on a trajectory. And, and how long does change take? Change to fulfill its aims does not happen overnight. It does take time. But I'm confident, based on what's happened over the last 8 months and the work done by Neelam, Nisha, and everybody in the team, is starting to embed that sort of culture where children going into care is not the first option, and when children do go into care, that we have a plan, and we have a plan going forward of how we can work with that child and that family to reunite. So if a child is placed nearer that family home, there's absolutely more opportunity to be able to work and get that child back with the family, because family are nearer, it's easy to have family time, etc., and keep those relationships. It's in the same community. And one thing that is perhaps worth knowing, saying, is that perhaps the term keep children in Staffordshire is not necessarily the right term, but it should be closer to home, you know, because as has been pointed out, with the size of the county, you know, a child from South Staffs being placed in Leek is still within the county, and actually being outside the county, but in Wolverhampton, Dudley, or somewhere like that, might be absolutely more appropriate because it is nearer. I think we need to be flexible on that. There's probably points that I haven't picked up on, whether Natasha's got anything, or in fact, if Nisha's got anything to add as well.
Mark, when John France was chairman 5 years ago, myself and John basically said what's in that report we wanted then, if you remember. We believed it should come back in-house then. It was a different setup with different deputy director and stuff like that, and they shot us down basically. Said, no, you can't do it, it'll never happen. So we're going back 5 years, you say you can't do it in 8 months, but if we decided 5 years ago, we may have been there now. I'm just trying to bring that up really there. You and I have dealt with children care for 40 years together. We know we've been with the various places we've been, so we know it's the most difficult job in the world. But the idea is really to get as many children with family members under the transformation process. So they weren't in care facilities. They never actually came into a full care. They were just trying to, with grandparents, whatever it was, or friends, and that's what we're trying to do. So it just seems now we're going away from a transformation by bringing this in. I mean, I would love a whole system where we're self-sufficient in the county for children and adults. I accept the cost is prohibitive, but I just think at the moment we're between a rock and a hard place.
I would disagree on the point that this goes against transformation. But I would prefer, if we could, not to make this about whether transformation, how well or otherwise that might have worked. You know, because with respect, because it will go away from what we're trying to say and do here, and take us down different sort of areas to discuss, of which I think we've had opportunity to discuss, and we will have opportunity to discuss again in the future. Natasha?
Just a couple of things then. So in terms of the transformation figures, the aspiration was still to move down to 9 children being in residential provision. So we were never going to have a situation where no children were in residential provision. So I think we still do need to plan for the fact that there will be some children who end up in that provision. I do think there is also an unintended consequence in terms of the pandemic. I don't think COVID-19 had the impact during the pandemic as it did after the pandemic for children, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing this increase in complexity. We've had a huge chunk of children who've been sat at home doing things that were completely contrary to what they'd known before, and then come out the other side and expected them to readjust completely normally. So I do think some of this is, absolutely kind of what we're seeing now. In terms of the cost then, Paul, the most expensive place that we've currently got in Staffordshire is £13,500 per week. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Councillor McMahon. I do apologise.
Thank you. I think Natasha has mentioned what I wanted to say in terms of, even if we get the number of children in care down, we will still have roughly over about 1,000 children plus minus in care. And what this paper focuses on is when you have, even if you have less children in care, you will have those high-end children with high needs. So we will always need to plan for those children at the higher end, and that's what this tries and aims to address. So, yeah.
I'm not saying we don't.
Thank you. I do apologise. Councillor Pardeshi was next.
Chair, I just wanted to ask if we acknowledge that foster parent placements are one of the best places to place our children, and one of the main reasons why we're not recruiting more foster parents is the cost and the payment. I'm at a loss as to why we can't offer more payment, and could this be a case of, if we don't do that now, all we're doing is accumulating problems, not just financial ones, but in many other ways, if we don't address that right now? Thank you.
So, Councillor, it's probably those higher end children that Natasha's spoken about that we would, would be our aim to try and place in our own residential homes are probably not children that are suitable for foster care anyway. It's children that are not as complex, that required that foster care and on that front, at the earliest opportunity we agreed with the government proposals and we gave foster carers the uplift. But it is work that we are looking at, and it is important, that things are sort of competitive. But people, I think, as in all walks of life recently, have left being foster carers for a variety of reasons. It's not just potentially financial. Across the market, across the country, we found after COVID, people have taken different routes, have decided to do things, and foster care is absolutely no different, I think, to lots of other areas.
Thank you. Sahid, I think you wanted to come up.
Yeah, thanks very much. Just going back to the previous question with regards to the framework contracts and regards to local authorities going bust, yeah, we don't know what the impact of that is. However, what we do know is having a framework contract is much more cost effective than a residential, than a spot purchase contract. So for fostering, for example, it's £200 cheaper per week going via framework, and for residential placements it's £3,000 a week cheaper to go via framework than spot, and that's the reason why we want to join the regional framework.
They're quite significant differences. I'm going to give the last two questions then, in that case. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you. My point's been covered.
Thank you. Last question then, Councillor Wilcox.
Thanks, Chair. Just under the risks on the report, where we talk about recruiting sufficient staff in a timely manner and having appropriate skilled staff, are you confident that there are people out in the marketplace who we will be able to attract to take on these positions? And if we don't in the time that you're talking about, is there provision to use it in it? Have we got staff already within the organisation that could step up or potentially move into these positions if we're not able to recruit? And then finally, are we in a marketplace, are we competitive with other authorities when we're sort of recruiting this sort of staff for this type of role going forward? Thank you, Chair.
So in terms of do I think we'll recruit people, I think it's notoriously difficult to recruit people to residential home jobs. However, we have just opened a new home and been successful in recruiting staff, a very competent and skilled staff workforce. So I think it can be done. I think it also requires us to perhaps as well rethink the level of staffing and the type of staff that we're recruiting to and how we work in partnership with others, because quite often the needs of the children are quite complex, and therefore we do need to be thinking about how we're working with health and other people, and again pulling on skill sets that might have not necessarily be amongst us anymore. So I think it's probably something that we need to think about in terms of how we're working with people services and making sure that we are recruiting the right kind of dynamic individuals who can deal with this cohort of children, because we are largely talking young people who are teenagers, so it's a different demographic necessarily than the traditional children's home. So yeah, I think we can recruit. I think we've got some really good support from people services. I think it'll require us to be quite creative in terms of the types of people that we're seeking to recruit. And again, I think it does need us working very closely with partners on it.
Thank you for that. I think, I can't see there's any other indication. Thank you for the presentation. I do think it's hugely encouraging from that presentation and from the report to see that we do seem to have a very sort of granular and detailed understanding of the threat and risk picture that we face as a local authority. And in particular, some of those challenges with an ever-increasing cost of an external market. Again, it was good news to hear that the cost of our most expensive placement, and I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was the chief exec of Cambridge who came out late last year to claim that he was paying in excess of £90,000 for an individual per week. So I do think that there is a huge threat to us as an organisation with that sort of volatility within the market. I do think it's really encouraging as well to see that we are taking a proactive approach to how we tackle this, and not that we would bury our head in the sand, but just to see that this as a response. And also, I think as been mentioned several times, there is an expectation that this will result in better outcomes for those most challenging young people, which I think is also to be welcomed. There are clear risks highlighted with you. You've heard those this morning, and people have some real concerns around that. I do get the impression, though, that we are quite rightly and in a timely manner reacting to what is a chaotic external market, and looking to put our young people, especially those that are vulnerable, at the centre of how we protect those young people. So I think in principle this committee is supportive of this as a plan. However, I do think, given the fact that if we lost 2 of those children, if my maths are right, two children out would be less than 85%. I might have that slightly wrong, but it doesn't give us a great deal of leeway in that respect. So I dare say that we'll be having update reports on this in the future as it goes forward. So thank you for that. Thank you for answering the questions, and we wish you well. Thank you again. Thanks, Mark. Are you staying for the next one, or is there a change of? Okay. Thank you. Moving on then to item 5, family help model. Councillor Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to talk very briefly about the point that Councillor Snape mentioned around transformation, and as we've developed that district model, we have not just implemented that district model and stuck with it and said that's great. We have looked at how it's performing, what areas that need strengthening, changing, doing in a slightly different way, and this family hub model that Nisha will explain to you in a little way is a tweak of how we operate amongst those teams. It's not whole-scale change, but it's a way, of doing things in a slightly different way, slightly rearranging things within each of those districts that we're going to trial to start with in 2 districts, Stafford and Lichfield. And this comes out of really some of the recommendations that were in the government response to the independent review and children's social care, the stable homes and stable homes built on love, and also feedback that we've had from internally from our own staff about how we can go forward and do things. So if it's okay with you, Mr. Chairman, I'll hand over to Nisha, who will go through the presentation.
Please do. Thank you.
Thank you. Like Councillor Sutton said, this pilot, this model, is not a change in policy or process or the way we deliver our services to children and families. It's a slight tweak that we want to try and see how it works for our children and families and also for our staff. Why did we need to think about this model? Why did we need to tweak the way we deliver, in the way in which services are shaped following transformation? It was because of our vision. The vision is for us to be able to deliver help at the earliest opportunity, to have that team around the child, which keeps families together in their communities. In order to achieve that vision, we need staff to have workloads whereby they can focus at the right help at the earliest opportunity, work intensively with the child and the partnership around the child to support the families to stay together and problems do not escalate through the system. It links into our children in care program, because when you have a worker who has got a very high workload, is unable to focus on lower level needs for some time, those needs can escalate. Within the model that we had following transformation, we had one assessment and staying together team which did lots of work, including court work. So child protection and court work is the higher end work. what gets missed in that environment is the lower level child in need work. As we were discussing in the earlier paper, that we are seeing the complexity of needs within children and families increase following COVID. Those families need quite a level of intensive work. So this pilot tries to tweak that system slightly and bring the child in need work within our family help service. Family help service aims to create a non-stigmatizing approach to working with families. We know from experience, families prefer to work with family practitioners. As soon as a social worker gets involved with a family, it becomes a bit of a difficult experience for families try to disengage with social workers because they see it as a punitive approach, as a statutory approach. Within this family help service, there will be more family practitioners who will be working alongside and under the overall guidance and oversight from a qualified social worker. So the statutory bits of works will be undertaken by a qualified social worker, but the help and the team around the child will work with child and the family to manage their needs at a much lower level. This sits in line with what has been within government recommendations from Stable Homes Built on Love. And there are national pathfinders who are actually trying to trial this model within 12 different local authorities. We unfortunately could not bid because we are already a part of another pathfinder and they can't have two pathfinders in the same local authority. So we are trying to pilot this within 2 districts and see how it works for us. And if it works and achieves the aims of bringing down the caseloads, getting the help at the earliest opportunity, we will look at making it full scale across all districts. So aims and objective is to implement that integrated localized model to reduce the handoffs between, family help, early help, CIN, CP, and children in care. It is about making sure that children and families are supported at the lowest level, at the earliest possible opportunity to manage those needs within communities, preventing them from escalating. What we are also trying to do is to bring differentially qualified professionals within the family help model so that, so support around domestic violence. We know majority of our children who end up in the children in care cohort have got neglect and domestic violence as the primary risk factor within their lives. So to get that help at the earliest opportunity within the family help model, we will also be having family group conferencing services within that to bring families together and to support them, come up with a plan to support children within communities. The operating model, as I shared, welfare of the child is paramount. The child is at the center of this model. The families access support in that non-stigmatizing environment where they are working with a group of professionals they find as friendly faces around them and are more likely to collaborate, work openly, and make that plan work for them. There's a shared understanding around, it's a strength-based model which works on the strengths of the families, helps them develop their own safety plans and manage them within communities. This is a very high-level picture of how this model will work. So we will still have the one front door where all the referrals come through our SCAS team. Anything that is very complex, very obviously child protection will go to our assessment and staying together teams. Other referrals will be redirected in the right place, signposted to either Tier 2 services or universal services. But the ones which require Tier 3 early help support and child in need level of work will go into the family help teams and will be worked through that within that team. There is a two-way working relationship. So if things escalate from child in need into the remit of child protection or court, they will have a quick handover into our assessment and staying together teams. Otherwise, things can stay down and then just managed at a lower level of service provision. This graph just provides a timeline of how this pilot has been working and how we think we aim for the pilot to be launched towards mid-March, and then we will watch how it is progressing for 9 months and tweak if there are any challenges in between. So there are mechanisms within the governance process to monitor the progress of this pilot quite tightly, and we aim to kind of finish and evaluate around October, November time of this year, looking at full-scale expansion if it works, if all goes to plan. This slideshow talks about the governance structure. So there are various projects which are looking at the systems, processes, resources, good practice, and monitoring how are we going to measure our successes. It is ultimately the Children in Care Programme Board has the governance of how the Family Help Pilot is working. In terms of opportunities and risks, there are multiple opportunities. The biggest one is reduced workloads within teams, manageable workloads so that children get help at the right place, at the right time, by the right professionals. Reduction in number of children escalating through the system, so hopefully lesser children going through the court system. Allowing more time for social workers to work with those higher end children to de-escalate them back into community rather than push them into children in care arena. Of course, right help at the earliest opportunity and improve partnership working. There is a level of risk around if trade unions want a full-scale consultation. We hope that it wouldn't be. We will know by next week. We have been linking in with trade unions throughout the development of this pilot so far, so we are hoping it wouldn't be, but we have to be aware of that risk. In terms of system constraints, because at this point in time, our early help services and social care services work on 2 different systems. So how those systems, Care Director and Capita, work together to create that system flow is another risk. But again, we are working to try and mitigate those. And that's it.
Thank you for that. I suppose an obvious question for me, I'm sure it's just last month I sat here and listened to all of these arguments, exactly the same, in support of adopting family hubs. At that time, we didn't have sufficient data to know whether that was right, wrong or indifferent. It was quite intuitive and we felt that it was the right way forward. And we look forward to seeing some data around how family hubs are working. Why would we not have the sort of confidence of our convictions, if you like, and just stick with one plan? We seem to have launched something last month. Well, it was launched before last month. We had a report on it last month. And now we're running another pilot around something similar, without really knowing whether the family hub was the right way forward. It sounded right. It just seems a bit off with timing for me. I accept it's only a pilot, so it's time limited, presumably. We'll have some results in 9 months' time and we'll know. But if what this offers is so important, why wasn't it part of the Family Hub presentation a couple of months ago? Why aren't we already doing it if this offers such huge benefits? It seems like we're going to have 2 things running in parallel, when actually I assume that's going to cost money, and we've already heard that the unions might want, so it'll hit difficulties. We've already agreed something. It's a very general, and I might have it wrong, of course, but I just don't know why we don't stick with what we've planned to do and evaluate that properly rather than pilot. I come from previously an organisation where we used to say if we have any more pilots, we'd build a runway, and you'd remember that, Mark, well. And I do think that, you know, joking aside, there is this difficulty, isn't there, that we just go off at tangents and there's no real data around whether these things are working. I'll stop there. The question really is that we've committed to family hubs. Why is this different? Why are we doing something different?
So I'll ask Natasha to start with the family hubs, and then perhaps Nisha can add some as well.
So I know it might feel a bit confusing, but there are 2 separate things that are happening really at national level. So the Department for Levelling Up, Communities and Housing are moving across to the Department for Education. And so what was the old Supporting Families programme is moving across to the Department for Education, and what they're seeing are 2 separate programmes of work. So they're seeing the Family Hub being one and Family Help being another. So family hubs are supposed to be targeted and aimed at prevention of demand, flow of demand into the system. So it's supposed to be, how do we make sure that we're working with partners to make sure that we've got access to timely help and support across a range of different partners, and making sure that actually those families don't have to necessarily fight, tell their story multiple different times to get into the right place. The family help part is really the council's response to how it works with partners to deliver that model. So they're not necessarily the same, they're not necessarily different either. It's the way in which the council responds to that partnership idea. So this is Nisha really kind of saying, for me, family help will be the way in which I help families to access my services, and that will be done by a family help practitioner who will work within my service, overseen by a social worker who might help them to assess whether or not the threshold of need escalates higher than they can manage on their own. So this is the way in which people will access some of the SCC services on offer, but it's not necessarily the same thing, if that makes sense.
And family hubs, aka what was previously known as children's centres, and we've moved across, and the age range has changed from just being sort of 0 to 5 all the way through. A lot of what family hubs do is those universal services and bringing those together, whereas this is those referrals into social care.
That's absolutely right, Mark. So this family hubs and family help are working at different tiers. So if we go by the traditional tier system, tier 1 is universal, 2 is early help, tier 3 is statutory early help, and tier 4 is statutory local authority services, social services. Family help is functioning in tier 4 level, and family hubs are working in tier 1, 2, more tier 1, less tier 2.
That's cleared this up, yeah. Councillor McMahon.
I'm very much a fan of the transformation model, and I really hope it works for you, because I think it's a great idea. I've got just a niggle about this. And this might appear a digression, Chair, but I assure you it's not. This feels to me like build it and they will come. That people build buildings, but the culture isn't there for people to take advantage of these municipal buildings. And I'll give you an amusing but altogether tragic example of this. I had to go and visit a friend of mine in Easterhouse who was a social worker in Easterhouse. At the time, they'd just built a brand new swimming pool. Before I met him, I went for a swim, and I was the only person in the pool. Beautiful pool. There was a whole load of staff sitting there watching me go up and down. After I'd done that, there was a sauna. I went into the sauna, and there was two of Easterhouse has some of the worst deprivation in the country. It's got some of the worst health outcomes in Europe. I mean, it's a really challenged place. I saw two of Easterhouse's finest trying to light up a roll-up, but they were unable to because of the humidity of the sauna. That was it. They were the only two people in the building. I wonder whether this, because it's right down at the bottom of the pyramid, level 1 and 2, is similar to build it and they will come. That we're trying to construct a structure that the current culture would feel uncomfortable with. And people might feel, are we interfering? It's not anything like, but it reminds me of this Holyrood's attempt to have individuals, external individuals, involved in families to support families, which I thought was a terrible policy. It's not like that, but it reminds me a bit of it. Are we sure that our culture is ready to accept something like this, or do people think that we will be interfering? That's it.
So what this isn't about a wish to have additional families or children referred into the system. It's those families, children that we receive referrals for, whichever way they come through the front door, and then when they come into the system, that very first earliest help, when it meets the statutory provision, is dealt with by our staff and managed by our staff in a different way, and in a way that we believe, and the pilot will show one way or another, in a different way, so that it is more effective. It's not about additional people coming into the system. If with that prevention model at the bottom level is what we hope we'll be able to work with through the family hubs that Natasha has articulated. So I'm sure Nisha will add more.
So I can see where probably confusion is coming, because the names sound quite similar: Family Hub, Family Help. So Family Hub is something that Natasha is leading, which is early help, early years, early help kind of work. Family Help, one, we are not asking for any additional resources for this. Those people and those children are already in the system. So if I can take everyone back to when we came with the workforce paper and we wanted further investment into children's services, at that time we shared with everyone that more than 50% of social workers within our service have got caseload above average. We made an investment within children's, which has got the design right and stabilized the service. In order to deliver right help at the right time, you need social workers who are staying with us, who are stable and able and have got a reasonable amount of caseloads to work with. With that cabinet investment that we had in children's services, that money went into creating certain roles which were not social work roles, they were other roles, but it stabilized the system. So IROs, exploitation, SEND staff, and with the uplifts, with the progression that came for social workers, that stabilized the staffing in children's. What it didn't do is bring down caseloads, because referrals are still coming in, social workers are stable, but the same number. What we need to do is to find a different way of delivery of statutory social work, which allows social workers who are dealing with high-end statutory social work, which is all the court work, public law outline work, and CP, to focus on those so that they can manage those things and de-escalate them. And what we are doing is take child in need, which is also Tier 4 work, out of those teams and place them in this family help team. So we are not asking any additional resources. What we will do is take out a proportionate number of existing social workers and put them with our Tier 3 early help staff within this family help team, who will work intensively with these children and prevent them escalating higher up into CP and court arena, which creates more work, more scrutiny, higher end of work. So we are looking at reconfiguring our existing staff to service the existing number of children, but preventing the work escalating up into the system, creating a higher level of need. And when we are moving the child in need work, so if I break down, I have got 1,350 children in care, I have got 635 child on CP plans, but I've got 2,500 children on child in need. This 2,500 roughly children on child in need I wouldn't say they get neglected, but when you have court work pushing you, this work doesn't take that much of a priority. But if I take the CIN work out of that higher end service, put that with in the family help team, those social workers are only focusing on CIN. They are only focusing on making sure those families are well supported at the right time so that they can maintain themselves within community. That's all this pilot is trying to do. I hope that...
No, thank you. That does clarify it. I would argue, though, if we're moving social workers, which is a finite resource, is there not some sort of implication in that because of their existing workloads? I understand the theory, and it sounds very grand that we can then prevent this 2,000 progressing on, and I think that has to be welcomed. And I keep stressing, it is only a pilot, isn't it? So we're not agreeing to a massive change in work. It is something that we want to see. I am going to move it on because we've got another two quite hefty reports to do. Councillor Sutton. Snape.
Thank you. Nisha, you said you're going to give us the positives that come out of this. We're a scrutiny committee. Could you also give us the negatives where it hasn't worked? So that when we look at other reports, we can say, well, this has been tried before, it didn't work. Why are you suggesting it again? So if you wouldn't mind that. That's one point. Point two is, we talk about social workers and their high work rates. Do we use agency social workers in this authority? And the third point is, we know over many years the court process, the slow effort we do down adoptions, whatever it is, has the court process speeded up to give us any assistance over, let's say, the last 12 months?
So first question, where any local authority where this hasn't worked. So we don't know of any local authority where this model hasn't worked. We have variations of this model. So
Where we try it, if, like you said, you're going to give us any positive come out. If where we try any negatives come out, I want it off us, not off
yes.
the local authority.
Yes, absolutely,
Yeah.
we will share that. And in terms of, agency staff, yes, we do have agency staff. So agency rate is around 7% in Staffordshire. 2 years ago, when transformation had just landed, our vacancy rates were around 21%. We have brought down our vacancy rate down to 14%, and then agency rate is hovering around 7 to 8%. So we do have that. We are with the new progression coming in, we are converting some agency into permanent, so which is positive. And the last one was, sorry, delays in court. Yes, our RDFJ, our LFJB is one of the best performing in the country at this point in time, and that is probably because we were the worst performing at one point. So we have started to dispose more cases in a timely way. We've worked very solidly with our LFJB. Courts have had more judges or more judge time, if not permanent judges, which have expedited those judgments. But we are working very closely, and we have recently launched a 26-week timeline whereby we are making sure that every case where we issue proceedings on, that we finish them within the national guidelines within 26 weeks. So, yeah.
Thank God. The last question, last two questions. Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Nisha. I'm very pleased, first of all, that Lichfield is one of these pilots, the area that I cover, part of it. In 12 of the report, it talks about, again, and we mentioned this in the report, the previous report, about recruitment and the difficulty that both Stafford and Lichfield have had in recruiting, albeit now they've moved forward, and that some of the social worker posts are going to be replaced with these family practitioners. Being the eternal optimist, if this pilot works after the 9 months, presumably then that will get rolled out across other districts and boroughs, and presumably then we will have the same issue about recruitment and changing potentially vacant social worker posts to family practitioners posts. I assume that's the way it would play out. In assessing the success of the pilot, I assume that whilst we're talking to the people that will be delivering the pilot, I assume we'll also talk to the people who it's delivered to, i.e. the youngsters, the families, the children, etc., to get their view on whether it works or not. I just have a concern. My only concern will be, if on the other hand we decide it isn't something we want to pursue and go forward, what happens to those family practitioners that we've taken on board? Will they then revert back or find alternative roles, and will we be in the same position again of having to recruit social workers again to replace those posts that the family practitioners have? If that makes sense. Thank you, Chair.
So we are looking to recruit to these existing social work vacancies that these districts have been carrying for some time, and they will be recruited to fixed term for the duration of this pilot, with a view to looking at options once the pilot is successful or not. So they wouldn't be permanently recruited for these positions. But if we were to scale this up across all 8 districts, we will have to look at how we go ahead with how many roles can we change into family practitioners, which is low cost and high retention, or not, really. So we'll have to do that maths at the end of the pilot.
Thank you for that. The last one then, Councillor Wildman.
Thank you very much. So my question is similar. We see family practitioners. So trying to get to the bottom of this, I think this report is quite confusing, and I think Bob highlighted that. So when I was reading it, it took me about 15 minutes to try and get to the bottom of where we are. Your explanations have been perfect. If those explanations perhaps would have been in the beginning of this report, it would have been helpful, I've got to say. What I can see, to summarise, is that the provision that we provide to children in need, they are going to be supported by family practitioners and not by social care workers. That's essentially what it is. Essentially, you could argue that the technical competence of those people supporting those children in need are being downgraded. Therefore, and in some cases, we're perhaps asking people to take a level up and to support children in need, are those people going to be given adequate training in order to carry out that role, which we have previously given to social workers?
So, child in need is a statutory service, and since the government response and the new working together that has come out, it creates that space for local authorities to look at the child in need cohort more creatively. So working together is now telling us that it shouldn't always be the social worker who takes a lead in terms of provision or holding that care plan for the family. It could be any professional working around that child who could be that lead professional, although it doesn't take away the statutory responsibility for local authority and therefore the need for social workers. That is why we need to move some social workers into the family help team to do the they will still be doing the statutory responsibilities and having oversight of child in need work, because child in need in Staffordshire, I've been in other local authorities where child in need is almost early help level work, but in Staffordshire, child in need is proper complex child in need work, which does need that expertise and experience from a social worker, but a family practitioner can always do the more visits, spending more time with the family, doing more direct pieces of work. They have more time available to them to do that under the overall supervision and guidance of a social worker. How cabinet investment has helped us create this family help model is we now have those grade 11 social workers who never existed in Staffordshire. So they are very experienced, highly qualified and able grade 11 social workers. So they are not grade 10s in this family help model. We are having grade 11 social workers who will be working with newly qualified social workers as well within this model, training them up on lower level of need, but they will be supervising all the work that is being done by family practitioners or by newly qualified social workers, making sure that it works seamlessly for that family. The challenge is when you don't have lots of social workers, it's creating that time of going intensively and doing those intense pieces of work quite regularly with those families so that you can stabilize them back in the community. But this model helps us create that time through family practitioners under the overall oversight of very skilled and experienced social workers.
That's reassuring. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the explanation as well. I think just in summary, I just wonder whether there is something to reflect on if it is confusing. Maybe and it might just be that it's confusing to the people here, but not yourself. It strikes me that the benefits of this are potentially quite considerable, aren't they? If we can put a brake on or hinder that movement from vulnerable people into a more formal setting, that must be welcome. And I think, especially when you give us the reassurance that there's no resource implications for it, it does seem like a win-win. So I think, again, I'm speaking for the group, but I think we would support this as a pilot. As I say, if it does work, it will have significant or make significant improvements. So full support, and we look forward in 9 months' time, or however long it'll be, to the results to see how well it's worked. So thank you for explaining it. Thank you for coming along and making the presentation. Can I suggest that we take a quick 10-minute comfort break? I don't mind looking up there. That says 20 to 5. Can we be back at...
Just 5 minutes.
Yeah, 5 minutes. Right, we'll make a start. Thank you for coming back so quickly. We'll move on then to item 6, Staffordshire Safeguarding Children's Board annual report. And welcome to Ian Vernell, is it Ian Vernell? And Lynn Milligan. Ian, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much again for the invite to the committee today. Just to reiterate to colleagues again my role as independent scrutineer and chair of the Safeguarding Children's Board. It's just important just to highlight that role that I have, which is independent of the arrangements, to ensure that I can provide assurances to the partners around the system and how it's working. You'll see obviously from the annual report that there is a range of different areas that the report focuses in on. And I guess from my perspective wanted just to briefly mention my observations, which is in the first part of the report in the first part of the report at page 6. Obviously this is my first opportunity really to report on the arrangements thus far, and it's an opportunity for me to highlight the areas I think where there's some good practice and multi-agency practice that's evidenced successfully, alongside some of the challenges that exist in the multi-agency arrangements. One of the things is obviously I've been in the role now 18 months, and I've had the opportunity to undertake some scrutiny work since that point. So I've worked on some scrutiny work in relation to the multi-agency safeguarding hub. I did a piece of work in December last year to look at those arrangements and how those arrangements are working, and that was in response to the changes of the splitting of Stoke and Staffordshire multi-agency safeguarding arrangements at the time. There's still some outstanding work to be done in relation to the multi-agency safeguarding hub, and obviously I'm quite keen from my perspective to see how the progress of that work is developing, because it is effectively the front end of the multi-agency safeguarding arrangements. And I've been quite clear in my view that there needs to be some stronger timelines and some stronger project planning around how that's going to work, because you recall from the last conversations we had that there was conversations around a technical solution supporting multi-agency arrangements which still hasn't yet been realised. Other areas that I've been undertaking scrutiny has included looking at the child safeguarding practice reviews and the learning that comes from those, and how agencies are learning from when there's child deaths or children are seriously hurt, and those reviews that are undertaken. And lastly is to look at the leadership of the arrangements, and in terms of the scrutiny of the leadership of the safeguarding arrangements, which is actually also in part of my role. So that's the scrutiny functions that I've been undertaking thus far. Just to highlight, obviously I think one of the things that I've been doing some visits to agencies across Staffordshire, so I've visited police colleagues, health colleagues and social care colleagues across the system. I've met and had conversations with senior leaders as well as frontline practitioners to get a real sense of how work is progressing in the authority in relation to multi-agency safeguarding. One of the things that I think is quite clear is that there is a true commitment and passion from frontline workers around getting it right for children. I certainly feel that when I met them, and a real strength in terms of how people work together at the front line. From my perspective, the partnership needs to focus its energy on the front line of practice. That's where most of the multi-agency arrangements happen for children and young people, and we need to assure ourselves that those frontline practice is confident, and people are confident about it, and it's kind of assured around it. There remain some challenges around financing the partnership, which has been an ongoing challenge, and it's highlighted in my report. And I think that's probably going to be an ongoing discussion between the partnership and the partners around that. I've been quite impressed by the group that sits below the board, which is the Scrutiny Assurance Group. I think they're starting to work really effectively. I have some real confidence about their prioritisation and the areas that they want to focus on. So I think there's some really good opportunities to see how that group is working together and how it will influence and impact on the system moving forward. You'll see from the report, obviously the priority for the partnership remains children who are experiencing neglect. There has been some work and activity in the partnership around that, which is the implementation of the graded care profile, which is a national approach to assessing and managing and intervening with neglect. I think there's probably more work to be done in relation to assuring ourselves that that has impactful. We don't have enough evidence, I don't think, at this point in time that that's impacting on children and young people's lives. We certainly have an excellent training package that's been provided, and I can't deny that there's been some good opportunities to influence practice in relation to practitioners' understanding of neglect for children. That's been really very positive, has been very well received by practitioners across the safeguarding system. But we do need to have more assurances around the impact of that in terms of neglect. I'm pleased to say that since we last met together, I have been meeting with my colleagues from the Health and Wellbeing Board, the Community Safety Partnership, and from the adult board as well, Adult Safeguarding Board, in an attempt really to try and be focused on some of the strategic priorities that we are sharing across the system. Domestic abuse is one highlighted that colleagues may be aware of, obviously, in terms of its importance in terms of both the Community Safety Partnership and the Children's Safeguarding world. And I think that's a positive development for colleagues to highlight. You'll see from the report that there's been 6 child safeguarding practice reviews undertaken in the time period, or referrals for child safeguarding practice reviews. I'm just about to conclude a piece of scrutiny work on the child safeguarding practice reviews because I'm very keen to understand how learning is impacted and influenced into the system. Having spoken to some practitioners on the front line, sometimes those messages aren't getting through, and I'm quite keen to understand why that is and how we can rectify that, because clearly the purpose of these reviews is to learn, and the system to learn, and then to implement that learning across the system, which means that you change practice. So that's important just to kind of factor in. There's some really positive relationships that I've developed with the school population. When we last met, I mentioned to you that I was engaged with local schools in terms of the arrangements moving forward with Working Together 23. I've visited a number of different schools across the county and had some really good conversations with head teachers and designated safeguarding leads, to the extent whereby I'm working with the safeguarding education team to have a group of designated safeguarding leads working alongside me in terms of scrutiny work, which I think will be really, really positive. One of the things that it's also in terms of highlight is in relation to the positives around the early help work. Obviously, it is not, the board doesn't necessarily oversee that. It comes into the partnership meetings, but the early help strategy, I think, is something that the partnership needs to have further scrutiny over, ensuring that it's effective and working in a safe way. And then lastly is in relation to the voices of children and young people. I am desperately keen to ensure that we understand the lived experiences of children and young people who have been through the system. That is notoriously difficult and challenging. I totally understand that. But I do feel that it's a missing part of our understanding around how we work and how the partnership works to support children and young people. It's a challenging piece of work to do, because if you think, for example, around children who are subject to child protection plans and their experiences of services and possibly the arrangements for those things, I think we need to understand better how they have experienced multi-agency practice around safeguarding, because that we will learn much more from listening to them possibly than we have up to now. So that is a piece of work that I'm really quite keen on progressing. Those are my highlights, I guess, in terms of the report, and obviously I can take any questions with my colleague, Lynn.
Ian, thank you. Thank you for that. I have to say, when I read this report, there are, as you say, some real highlights. That sort of learning from reviews, I think that's really important. And as you pointed out, the early intervention work. I do have to say that when you read through, there are some worrying aspects within it, aren't there? And for example, there's a reference, I think it's page 35, where senior managers in organisations are refusing or failing to sign up to what we're trying to do. 20% increase in child exploitation. The police have hit, 6 of 15 recommendations. You talked about domestic violence there, and it identifies 6,000 children exposed to the dangers of domestic violence. You also talked about training, and yet on page 51, if you look at the training record, it's not particularly impressive, is it? You know, with some organisations, the NHS, Staffordshire Police, all under 5% people. So it doesn't paint a hugely encouraging picture. And I suppose really just cutting to the chase, if we look at item 5 on page 42, which is ensuring efficient and effective safeguarding practice, as an independent reviewer that is there to give us some reassurance, do you think we do have an effective safeguarding practice in with all of the partners?
I think one of the things that I've said to the partnership is that there is work to do. I'm quite clear about that in my mind, is that there's work to do. I think one of the things that I've tried to do is to bring some honesty and openness into the system, to just explain what I perceive to be some of the challenges that exist. You've highlighted, the issues, for example, around multi-agency training and the lack of commitment for some agencies to attend that training. Absolutely right. Alongside the issues around child exploitation, which you've highlighted. One of the things that it's my role to do is to seek assurances around some of those areas of challenge, and child exploitation has been one focus. And you'll see from the report there's a development that we've started around something called a learning hub. And the learning hub is focused on child exploitation as its first priority. Because I think it is a vulnerability that we need to address in terms of the system. One of the things that I can be assured of, as I said to you before, is that frontline practitioners are committed and know their children well. Certainly in conversations with them, I feel very confident about that. I think the challenges exist in the partnership and how those partnerships work together. It's ensuring that we're confident that, that at all levels, effectively, that there is good safeguarding practice. So I think I've been quite clear in my mind about the areas that I've been concerned about, and that's partly the reasons why there's certain areas of scrutiny that I shall continue to focus on, and that being, as I said to you, the multi-agency safeguarding hub, as well as child exploitation and the learning from reviews. So yes, I think it's a mixed picture, I would suggest, and there are areas clearly that the partners need to be focused on working together more proactively together.
No, thank you for that. And I do very much welcome that honesty and openness. As I say, the report does contain sort of bones and all, doesn't it? But forgive me if I push you one more time. As the independent assessor, what is your view on the effectiveness and efficiency of our safeguarding arrangements in this borough?
I'm not going to repeat what I've just said. I guess one of those is probably unhelpful to colleagues around that. I have been clear that I think that in terms of the strategic leadership of the arrangements, that needs they need to own those arrangements. Working together 2023, I think, enhances the responsibilities of the Chief Executive, the Chief Constable of Police, Staffordshire Police, and the Chief Executive of the ICB far more, and I think that's been a very helpful and welcome approach, because it will refocus, I think, in terms of strategic priority. There have been some I mean, the example around the finances has been a challenge. You know, my role there is to try and mediate between the three partners to agree a budget. That's been exceptionally challenging. And my view is that we're talking about children and young people here. That should be, in my opinion, a priority of the three partners. And actually we should be seeking agreement about how those things work. So I think there's some, and also at the same time, the strategic leadership of the partnership needs to be owning the vision, being very focused on their priorities. And as I said to you before, that is reprioritising, I think, in terms of looking at frontline practice. So we have priorities in the partnership arrangements, but I think there's a need to refocus back in on what's really happening at the front end of safeguarding practice. That's where you manage risks. And so, yes, I would say to you that needs to be the refocus of the partnership arrangements on how effective are these arrangements working at the front line of safeguarding practice. And that's the right thing to do.
Last question then. Are you confident that we're moving in the right direction then, at least? You talk about refocusing and better partnership working. I mean, there were even things in the report about this inability to share information. I mean, that, you know, the legislation around that must be 20 years old now. And I just find it frustrating and worrying that we are working in a partnership where there are still concerns about it. There was even a comment in the report about certain partners not understanding what the Act says and actually going back to try to seek some clarification. And all of those things I find incredibly worrying and concerning. If we're refusing, well, if we can't share information and we don't know what the Act is telling us, and all of the other partners do seem to have some real barriers, then it gives me great cause for concern around how effective we are as an organisation. So I would be interested to know whether you think we're moving in the right direction generally now, and 20% increase in child exploitation. We are bordering a local authority that's just had the worst gang type sexual exploitation in perhaps in the last 10 or 20 years in Telford. Other areas that we border have had similar grooming type experiences. It would be neglectful to think that we don't have something of that here, and the fact that we don't seem to understand it and know about it, and this report doesn't give me a great deal of confidence that if it was here that we'd know about it and be able to do something about it, we still seem to be in this position of trying to move forward with the very basics about understanding what we're supposed to be doing, and also whether or not we understand the legislation and whether we're willing to share the necessary.
So in terms of the first question, Chair, in terms of right direction, I think, yes, I think there is a commitment to work on some of the issues that you quite rightly raised in the report as concerns. There is an information sharing agreement that the partnership has, which has been refreshed again. But again, it's about how will we ensure that the line of sight moving down to frontline practice is reassured. That's where you want those information sharing arrangements to be working effectively. But it is around ensuring that we have confidence in that. We have gone round in circles sometimes on that issue. And I can be frustrated as other colleagues in relation to, this being a challenge and why would it be, given the fact we're talking about vulnerable children and young people. So we do have an information sharing agreement that's in place. And I do think child exploitation is a key area for focus in relation to the experiences of children and young people. And I'm really helpful. I mean, I've kind of emphasised in my context around the data that's provided to the partnership. The data needs to be multi-agency. It needs to be clear. It needs to be focused on the priorities of the partnership arrangements. And I think that, sometimes we need to be much more focused on what the experiences of children and young people are, as well as the data. And I'm not confident at this point in time that we've got that part right. So I can't say 100% that as a result of going to a MACE panel, for example, that child his experience is now better as a result of going to those panels. Certainly we can say some of the data is very supportive of that, but I think it's about the experiences of children and young people which is probably more important. So I think, yes, I feel confident that we may be at a tipping point in terms of moving forward with some of those issues. I think you'll be aware of the inspections that have taken place in terms of the police and with maternity services and other arrangements in the authority, and I think we've now just reached a point where we can say this is our focus, these are our priorities, this is what we need to really focus in on. And as I say, from my perspective, it's about around frontline practice.
Thank you for that. Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ian, for your report. I get the distinct impression from reading the report that it's a bit like a football analogy, that some of the partners are turning up for the game, but not necessarily taking part, just sitting on the bench maybe. And certain elements of it certainly come through. And not to go over what you said earlier, Chair, but this piece around collaboration and sharing data, we have gone on and on. I don't know how many times in meetings where we said it really is important that collaboration and sharing of information in the multi-agency network is really important. And when I see in the report the piece about developing relationships between partners and educational establishments, you'd have thought that would have been ongoing and actually be more advanced than you pull out of the report. And it's the same around the training and development analysis. The real low uptake of these partners makes you think, actually, what importance are they putting on the partnership? And I just wonder your role as scrutineer of it, whether you have any powers to actually be saying to these partners, look, you need to really up your game here, because you're the one that comes and talks to us about how the partnership is working. And I agree with the Chair, there are some real concerns here that we've talked about a lot of this before and nothing seems to have moved on or materialised, and particularly around the stuff around the police and whatever, and their real poor performance at their training analysis, 2% I think. They really need a bit of a kicking, really, to say you need to up your game here, you need to come to the party, you need to play your part, because otherwise I think we'll just go on in this sort of endless sort of cycle of of you trying to come here and justify what's going on. And at the same time, there are some good things that are happening, and you clearly point that out. But I just get this impression that the partnership doesn't seem to be working as a real true partnership. And you're having to point out things that you would imagine that they would have already been doing to some degree already. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
I think the football analogy is a useful one. I think one of the things that I feel confident about, as I said to you before, is the role of the Scrutiny Assurance Group, which is the role of in terms of the functions of the partnership, which sits below the board. And that is a developing, and that's a really, I think, a strong opportunity. I think that's a really strong opportunity to develop some of the issues and to work on some of the issues. And I think the refocusing of, you know, the arrangements around frontline practice is a key part of that. You know, I think I've mentioned in my report around delegation. And I've kind of highlighted in my summary report about the fact that, you know, there is possibly a level of delegation which means strategically you can't make decisions. And I've expressed my frustrations around that issue. Because there is a need to, you know, that they need to be part of these arrangements. You know, that they're you know, they are statutorily responsible. And that's why I really welcome the fact that the chief executives of the ICB and the council and the chief constable have far more responsibility and accountability than they've had previously. And that's really important, because if you think about it, it can only sit at certain levels, and I think it's really important that the ownership sits with that level of strategic leader. And my frustrations have been around the conversations, you know, delegating down to what would effectively be in the police, a detective chief inspector, which, with all due respect, they are not people that can make decisions in that strategic space. And that's not criticising one particular agency, because they all do it. So I think it's from my perspective about saying, you know, there is a very clear accountability line. Working Together 2023 clearly outlines that accountability line. And therefore, you know, you have to be clear about your strategic arrangements and how they work in practice. Because some of the issues that you raise fall down because of the delegation of authority. And that is a problem, which I've highlighted to the partners and you know, will reinforce over and over again in terms of that. In terms of my power, my power is, you know, I will go to the chief executive, would be the chief executives in relation to the issues that I've raised. Now, I should be reporting to the chief executives. That should be something that's put in place, and I've recommended that to the partnership, because I've been reporting directly to the people that sit on the board. That doesn't give any kind of sense of accountability. So I'm very clear about those arrangements. So I think that does shift it, and it will shift it. And I think that's what I'm pretty confident about in the moving forward, is that that difference will be there as a result of that.
Are there any other local authorities that do anything different around these strategic type arrangements? I seem to recall somewhere there was that sort of gold, silver, bronze arrangement, you know, that where gold was the chief execs and everything else had clearly set the policy, and or did I dream it?
There are some local authorities that clearly have strategic accountability lines that involve the chief executive and the chief constables, and they set the strategic direction. And also what it does influence, and I think it's a really strong point for Staffordshire, is it does then influence about how there is a direct link between the strategic leaders and frontline practice. And you have a golden thread that exists. And I think that's something that is an opportunity to really develop here.
Thank you for that. Councillor Wildman.
Thank you, Chair. 2 points before I ask my question. First of all, it used to be the case that the Children's Safeguarding Board didn't have a independent scrutineer. I think that's right, and it was chaired by a member of the board. So I think that your addition is hugely beneficial to our scrutiny. So that's first of all, and I think that was a change in the law that allowed that to happen, I think. And the second of all is we normally receive reports which don't have the warts and all in. And we have to try and sit through and figure out what's going on. This doesn't do that, and it's commendable to you for producing something that we can all understand the actual picture that's going on the ground, because trust me, as a counsellor, that is extremely difficult to find out unless you talk to frontline staff. The question I had, and it's very simple, is, and it goes back to the point of attendance at meetings, how well is your board attended by the chief executives? And what I'd like you to do, even after the meeting, is send the attendance list of your board meetings for the last 12 months to see who's attended. And do they attend face-to-face? So do they attend in person? That would be my first question. Thank you.
Firstly, unfortunately, working together 2023 has shifted the position in relation to my role as chair. So my role as chair will end because their expectation is one of the safeguarding lead partners will take that responsibility. I rejected that when I fed back the consultation, because I do think that there needs to be a level of independence in those arrangements. However, the law as it stands, so by September this year, the partnership has to nominate a chair within the three partners. So my role effectively will shift to be independent scrutineer only. As I said, I have some views about that, but I think it will be interesting to see how that works moving forward. In terms of face-to-face meetings, one of the things that I have encouraged is face-to-face meetings, because I also want them to be held in environments which have children and families present. Whilst not relevant to this report, in September last year we did go to Warrington, the Youth Offending Institution, and had a board meeting at the institution. We met some young people there. I think those sorts of things have immense impact, and you really get a sense of how safeguarding arrangements are working for children and young people. I mean, particularly in the secure estate, that was a very helpful conversation with those young people. What I want to see from it is action. So there's lots of things they said about those experiences. So this year, I'm encouraging the partnership to meet face-to-face more often, and in places where children and young people are located, so that we have the chance to actually engage with them. In relation to attendance, since I've been in role, chief executives haven't been at the partnership board meeting. It's been the delegated partners, which is the Director of Children's Social Care, the Deputy Chief Constable, and the ICB representative, who I can't remember her title because it's a long one. Chief Nurse, thank you. To Chief Nurse and Maternity. So those are the three representatives at the board. So no, Chief Executive haven't attended that. One of the things that I have done, and just to reassure you that I have met with your Chief Executive before Christmas, and I am intending to meet with the Chief Executive of the ICB and the Chief Constable in January.
Thank you. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you. It's a very honest report. That's the bottom line, and I just want to echo Connor's words and say we're very grateful for that. But as a committee, we can't unknow what we now know, and I wonder whether we should invite the chief execs of the statutory authorities to come here and account for why they can't liaise properly, they can't communicate, they can't share information, which, as you quite rightly said, Chair, has been in reports of children's deaths and the like for decades now. I feel that I don't want to over-egg this, but it reminds me a bit of Francis and mid-staffs, and the scrutiny committee at the county was criticised in the Francis report for missing a trick. We cannot put ourselves in the position where we miss a trick, and therefore now that we know, I do feel that we have to do something, whether it's invite the chief execs or whatever. My second point is completely different, Ian, if I may, and that's the issue of online abuse, which is well recognised now that it's viral. I would be interested to know where the statutory authorities sit with that and whether they're taking it seriously, and whether it will appear in your report to the partners, whether it will appear to your report partners on effectiveness. It's something that personally I feel quite strongly about, it's making an already difficult situation substantially worse. I'd like your view. Thank you.
I think we discussed this last time in the scrutiny committee, and you gave some helpful guidance, I think, from previous experiences in other areas. The online abuse obviously covers in relation to the sexual exploitation and child exploitation field of work. I think it's an area that we still need to have some scrutiny on. I do feel that, as I said, child exploitation across the authority, across the arrangements, we need to have some assurances around how effective those arrangements are, and child online abuse would be included in that context. As I said to you earlier, the Learning Hub, which is the new arrangements that we're building into the system at the moment, is focusing on child exploitation, and I'm happy to include online abuse as part of that exploration. Just to say, the Learning Hub is a new initiative that we're looking at, and it's a very focused piece of work on a particular area of practice. So child exploitation is the focus, and it then makes recommendations to the partnership around how effective the arrangements are, and we can include online abuse as part of that exploration.
Was that all? Councillor Snape.
Thank you, Ian. I'd like to compliment you on the quality of the report and the openness of it, as other people have. Before Christmas, we had the police commissioner here with the middle-ranking chief superintendent, and we spoke about staff's deficiencies, really, and the change that we needed there. So I worry that the figures that are here, really, are not the true figures, because one of their criticisms was lack of reporting of offences. So really, I worry about that for the future, really. You say ongoing work. Are you allowed to put a timescale on that ongoing work where you can say to them it'll be 6 months? Because we've heard from you last year it was ongoing work. We heard from your predecessor it was ongoing work, and it rolls over like that, really. The Chief Constable has been in position now for just bang on 2 years, really. Chris Noble has. Before he took over, and when we had the police commissioner here, one of the reasons why he was appointed was it was a total outside body. He'd come from Cleveland, Northern Ireland, etc. Previously, it was a lot internal positions, and nothing was changing. So I'll give him a defence on that, and our chief executive as well. He's new in post, so hopefully over the next 12 months we can have a lot of working together to improve things. But I would like to support the suggestion that my colleague has made to our chairman, that in the future, really, that we do bring the chief executives here and quiz them like we did the police commissioner, who is responsible for administration side, not for the operational side, where we can actually ask the operational questions where face-to-face, not on Teams or anything else. But thank you for your report.
Sorry, did you want to add anything to that, Ian? No.
I don't think there's anything else, unless you want some specific areas you want me to comment on. No.
No, thank you. Thank you for that. I think, as you probably gathered, there are some concerns, and I think we all share those concerns within this report. I don't think it would be useful to go through each of the, as they're called, barriers in here and talk about each of the partners, given the fact that most of the partners aren't here. And I don't know what the benefit of that would be other than to reassure ourselves that we weren't completely happy that we do have an effective and efficient safeguarding process here in the borough. I do think that we perhaps need to move forward with it to try to gain some sense of assurance. Bear in mind we've spoken quite a lot about the vulnerability of these young people here in our communities and how that sort of fundamental protection and safeguarding of those young people. I think as we move forward, I wonder what your view would be about some form of interim report rather than waiting for another 12 months. That's not to be negative in any way, but I do think we now have a sense of urgency around where we're going with this, and we do need some reassurance that we're going in the right direction. I don't know what that interim or the timescale for that would be. Perhaps that's something we could discuss outside this meeting. And the other message, of course, that's come through is about some sort of engagement with chief officers from each of the organisations. Again, I don't want to decide here and now what that looks like. I do think we need to perhaps take that back and think carefully about how we're going to move forward with this as we do. It feels a little uncomfortable for me sitting here. Usually with these reports, you can see what we're trying to achieve. You can see the ambition. Clearly, the ambition is here. We want to protect young people. And the way that you outline that move forward is encouraging in a sort of dark picture. There is some encouragement in that. I am concerned about your lack of involvement moving forward that you alluded to, and how that is going to manifest itself. But that's perhaps something for us to talk through with the Chief Officer Group as and when we decide how we're going to do that. So I think what I'm going to do is bring it to a close. And I think we should identify, at least in the minutes, that there are some serious concerns around the partnership working, around whether we are offering an effective and efficient safeguarding environment for young people. And also, if we could have some conversation outside this meeting around an interim report that gives us some direction, looks at the results of the many things that you've suggested, which are all encouraging, and then also that engagement with those chief officers at the earliest opportunity, I think. So unless there's any other points, I think I'm going to call a halt. But again, I'd just echo, thank you for coming along and taking the brunt of the criticism of this report. And it's been said several times, but it is really refreshing in a strange sort of way to have that granular sort of warts and all view of where we are with this. And we're immensely grateful for that. So thank you for coming along. Thanks very much. Right, thank you for that. Moving on to item 7, Stafford and Stoke-on-Trent Adult Safeguarding Partnership Board. Jeremy, did you want to join us? While Jeremy's getting his things together, can I just welcome Ruth, Helen and John. Thank you very much for coming along this morning. I suppose it might be useful if you know who else is joining us as well. So we'll do very quickly around the table if that's okay. Bob Spencer, County Councillor for Codsall, and I chair this meeting. Paul.
Paul Snake, Vice Chair this meeting, Chairman of the County Council and Councillor for Cannock.
Division.
Johnny McMahon, Hensford and Rawnsley.
Kath Perry, to Eliasington and Featherstone.
Councillor Paul Northcott, Cabinet Support Member for Safeguarding and ICB.
County Councillor Mike Wilcox, representing Burntwood South and Chair of Corporate Overview and Scrutiny.
Good afternoon. County Councillor Jeremy Pert from Eccleshire Division, but Chair of Health and Care Overview and Scrutiny Committee.
Conor Wildman, County Councillor for Burton Tower Division.
Thank you for that. Again, thank you for coming along. John, did you want to open?
I was going to say good morning, but it's good afternoon, everyone. Can't believe it's 12 months since we were last here, but I'm just mindful of time. Chairman, can I just confirm? He did say 12:30 finish on this. Are we okay? Is there a time constraint on us?
We're going to try and finish at 12:30, but inevitably we'll probably...
That's why I was just mindful. We can talk quickly, but we were here for 90 minutes last year. But
we're fine. I think there was someone else in this room, but it's been sorted, hasn't it? So,
yes, I'm not aware that anyone's...
So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the time is in your hands.
Chair, I shall be very brief with my introduction. I'm mindful questions are most important from this process. As you can see, the report is there. The Safeguarding Adult Board is about adults with care and support needs who are at risk of or experiencing abuse or neglect. So we're talking about the most vulnerable people within our communities. As a statutory safeguarding board, we have 3 statutory responsibilities. One is to produce an annual report. We need to produce a strategic plan, and we need to commission, when it's relevant, those abuse and neglect cases that meet the criteria under the Care Act for a safeguarding adult review. I'm going to cut through some of what I would have said, but I just want to go very briefly to the point. The report this year is longer than it has been in previous years. The reason it's longer is because we revised the board strategic plan last year, so this is the first year of 3 of reporting against that strategic plan. But the important point I just want to emphasise is, and I've been the chair now for 8 years, so I'm just coming up to the conclusion of my tenure, but I've been in post for 8 years. And one of the things that I've been conscious of over that time, and my colleagues today can allude to this, is the number of recurring themes from those safeguarding adult reviews. And the point I want to emphasise is the strategic plan aims to address that. We have 5 themes, and they are recurring themes, and they're the ones that we keep going back to, wringing our hands and saying, how come this keeps cropping up? So what you will see in the report this time is a response from most of the partner agencies about what they've actually been doing in response to the strategic plan. And some of them are at a fairly basic level. We're now in year 2 and there's a lot more to report. So I'm looking forward to our next annual report to put a bit more flesh on the bones. But the point is that we have good engagement from our partners, and I was particularly interested in the discussion that's just taken place about the children world. This safeguarding board, this adult safeguarding board, I would like to think of as in a mature position now. I have written in the past about it, it's maturing. I think we have a mature partnership where there's strong engagement. We've created an environment for constructive challenge, and all of the meetings displays all those ingredients. And Councillor McMahon is previously a member of the board, and obviously Councillor Northcott here now would no doubt have a view on that as well. But I think that's the essence of it. So the drive is to ensure that we are meeting those priorities within the strategic plan, to look for evidence that is taking place. There's a further priority which is around raising awareness internally to organisations and externally to the public, and that will chiefly be about encouraging reporting. And you'll see in the detail of the report that yet again the number of safeguarding concerns has actually gone up, 15,680 to be precise. That's over, well, it's approaching 3,000 up from where we were last year. But I would urge you as a committee to see that as a positive, because it reflects the work that's going on. We are not complacent. We know that there is underreporting in safeguarding, particularly financial abuse, particularly around domestic abuse. And there's an item on the board in 2 weeks' time looking at the hidden abuse within our communities and how we can ensure that we're doing more about that. So my prediction to you is we could be seeing higher numbers next year, but don't see that necessarily as a bad thing, because it means we can do something about it. I did say keep it brief. I'm going to stop there and give you an opportunity for any questions. Either Ruth Helmer or myself are happy to take any questions you might have on the report. Thank you.
No, thank you for that. I suppose the general question, really to start off with, and it goes to your opening address, and you say it is the big question to demonstrate the evidence that is necessary to change practice in response to learning, and those changes have been implemented. Are you happy that they have, that the evidence is there to support that?
That is the number one question. And we have been constantly seeking assurances from partners. You know, we have quite an extensive board network, and the board relies on people coming forward to explain what they're doing and the difference that we're making. Perhaps bring Helen on in a minute, but because what we have been doing is in response to the safeguarding adult reviews, and we've got one that it's not a Staffordshire case, but it's a Stoke one, but it's very, very relevant to Staffordshire, around Andrew. And Helen, do you want to talk about some of the, you know, what we've actually done to pick up the learning from that, particularly with the training events, and importantly, some of that evaluation that's come back from Anna Woodbury?
Yes, SAR Andrew was a review that we had independently undertaken, and as a consequence of that we've put on learning events with regards to trauma-informed practice and other events including self-neglect. We bought into a national project about the impact of alcohol and cognitive ability to make decisions. Talking to several people throughout the organisations, we've heard examples of people saying, as a result of attending that event, I do things differently. I understand more about self-neglect and that it isn't a lifestyle choice. It's about professional curiosity and understanding what has led to people living living the life that they lead. It's helped us to better understand the importance of grief and loss on a person. We're doing another safeguarding adult review in Staffordshire currently, where grief and loss of two one husband and one a long-term partner had on a woman. And that was something that we hadn't really identified previously. So we're looking at bereavement and what voluntary sector support can be given to people who have lost significant people. Jo Coucher only said the other week that she was talking to a social worker who was saying, as a result of the review, she thinks about her practice on a daily basis. We had the events evaluated by putting in place something that a colleague from Stoke-on-Trent has helped us to develop, where we seek feedback, and we've always found it quite difficult to understand the impact. I think it's very difficult for the so what element. It's very easy to do, but the so what. So we're trying to better understand the so what, and we're getting consistently people, and we trained 1,196 people, 193 last year, trained, provided opportunities for learning events. And overwhelmingly people are saying that after the presentation, there's been a significant step change in their understanding of the topics that we're bringing to them, which has included mental capacity as well, and the impact on self-neglect. And also the frequency. A third of people attending have said they will use that new information on a daily basis. So we are absolutely focusing on practitioners, not middle managers, not senior managers or executive officers. The whole thrust of our strategic priorities is to impact on those recurring themes from our safeguarding adult reviews, those 5 strands. So we're very, very much focused on improvements of practice. Sorry, I was a bit long.
No, thank you. Thank you for that. I think one of the issues around the Andrew scenario that you talk about here, he was seen on 308 occasions by 11 organisations. It has that sort of Victoria Columbier feel about it, doesn't it, where everyone has an involvement but no one does anything. And I know it's a very broad question, but in your opinion, given all this extra training and the plan, would I be right in assuming that we're significantly less likely now to see another Andrew? I know you can't say no, but where's the reassurance about we won't have another Andrew?
Perhaps being written on this, but I do want to make this point, though, that the striking thing about Andrew, and we do talk about it being a watershed in safeguarding adults terms, is there are so many people now who are talking about that SAR, whether it's in Stoke, Staffordshire or elsewhere. I go to regional meetings, and it was even mentioned at a regional meeting. You know, we're getting that message out, and we're getting practitioners to focus on the life events of an individual. And the question you asked is the question I asked at one of the board meetings, and that's why we've come to have this strategic priority. I said, how many more Andrews are there? And at that point, I was told, well, there could be 20. That was a response we had from Stoke, just off the top of the head. We would not be so complacent to say that we haven't cracked this, but what we do know is that there's an awful lot of effort going into this now. People are talking about it. We're actually getting positive responses back about what people are actually doing. Not what they're pledging to do, what they're actually doing, what is different, and Helen's already alluded to some of that. And it's quite refreshing, actually, to hear them talking. People can actually relate to the case and apply that then to the situation then. I mean, you know, let's be honest, 1,200 people going through safeguarding training events, I think is to be commended, given all the other pressures that are there, but people have been queuing up, wanting to attend, and there's an enthusiasm. I've attended some myself. There's an enthusiasm to attending these events and wanting to be involved. And the chat that comes, because some of them are done through the teams, it's very, very inspiring to see, and I think it's anecdotal, but it's there in a way that it wouldn't have been there maybe 5 years ago. Ruth, do you want to just add to that, because you're quite close to this?
Yeah, I can add. I don't know. I certainly wouldn't sit here, I have to say, Chair, unfortunately, and say there will never be another Andrew. but I would completely agree the difference that the learning events for this has made, and I've been around for 20 years, but the difference that I've seen in practitioners, I've had several practitioners approach me asking me to look at case reviews with them, so to do case reflection sessions based on the learning that they've gained from Andrew, from the learning events put on. And actually, not only them, but their managers. So they're opening up discussions, particularly when we're focusing and talking about self-neglect, in a different way. So there is this much more realisation that these situations can't be dealt with swiftly, that these require time. Now, as a practitioner, as a social worker, I can say I've always known that, but being given the space and the time to be able to work in that way maybe hasn't always been there. And I think as an organisation, so yes, absolutely, the training is geared towards practitioners, which is great. But what we've also had is leaders and senior leaders attending who then recognise the importance of creating an environment for practitioners to be able to do their job and do that well. And I think that that's actually where you start to get some of that more sea change impact that's sort of coming through. The other part of that is the training or the learning sessions that have been put on by the board have identified those training areas that we as a local authority need to focus on specifically for our staff as well. So what's been really helpful for me, and I'll use the fact that it actually was looking at the chat as I was sat in there, of where were people talking, what were they talking about, where were they asking those questions, and a lot of that was around capacity, fluctuating capacity. It's quite, as I always say, if you read the legislation, it comes across as being really easy to do, but actually in practice, assessing capacity and thinking about the impact of that is actually quite complex. So we're now looking at developing our training in specific areas more rather than just general MCA, so that actually then we can then support people more closely with some of these aspects. So I think that we have, for me, that change in recognition of the approach needed as much within our organisation, and actually I would say across all organisations as well. So in our partnership arrangements, our ability to work with each other, as you pointed out there, 308 different visits from 11 different organisations, and actually when you look through the detail, no real multi-agency response. So where does that come from, and how is that being being brought to the fore? And those are the areas that we're working on. I wouldn't say we're there yet, but I certainly feel in a positive position that we're moving forward with that.
Thank you for that. It reminds me of the the government's contest arrangements around prevent and stopping terrorism. The big drive around that was to encourage our teachers, practice nurses, a whole host of people to metaphorically put their hand in the air and say this isn't right. Do we see that? Are there practitioners stopping this process and saying something needs to happen here? Because the big problem with all of those 308 visits strikes me that no one then noted or thought someone else was doing it. Is there evidence that we do have, as you called it, and I think it comes from one of the acts, doesn't it, that professional curiosity? Are we convinced that we've got more professional curiosity? Are people asking the questions? And the second one is, what happens when someone does put their hand in the air? Are they supported? Is there a process of moving it on? Because that's the way that this is stopped, isn't it? Is to encourage people to say, almost that gut feelings and there's something isn't right here and someone needs to look at it against a background of being very busy anyway. And I just wonder if there's any evidence of that more open. I know you talk about those discussions, that's really encouraging. But are people pointing and saying there's something wrong there and someone else needs to pick that up and move it forward?
So what I would say is that, okay, I have been contacted with a number of those case discussions. So actually for me, that does show that people are putting their hands up in the air and going, this isn't right. And as a practitioner, I'm finding this difficult. So actually, what is it that needs to happen next? But the other thing for me that's really encouraging is that I've been contacted, as have colleagues of mine, from other agencies, putting their hands up going, hang on a minute, this isn't right. Can you come in and, you know, support? So not just so from internally through our public health colleagues, from externally through our district borough councils who have got in touch as well about various individuals, but also more broadly about how they should be approaching things. So for me, there is that recognition, but I would my reservation, I suppose, if that's the right word to use, would be as to the sustainability, and when things become very busy, is this going to carry on? That's the thing that I think we still need to be working on. So I know as a board we are working certainly around self-neglect toolkits, getting that out there, looking again at our escalation process, and internally we're looking at our through our auditing processes, we are focusing around certain areas to see as to whether professional curiosity in general is being used. Because if in general you've got professional curiosity, you'll have it in the specifics as well, and actually opening up those conversations. So our audit looks for that. So we're trying to make sure that we've got that. We meet monthly with individual teams and talk that through with them as well. So to say to them, how is this feeling for you? Are you able to go out there? Do you have the time? How is that impacting? Obviously, practitioners never have enough time, but it's how are they able to address that, and also then how are they able to escalate their concerns? Do they feel that they've got that clear route of escalation, and does that work for them? And it doesn't in all cases. So those are the bits that we're addressing at the moment.
No, that sounds really encouraging. Thank you for that, Councillor Snape.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, panel. When I look at the case that we've just discussed, then I look at the ethnicity, and we've got 50.3% women across the county, yet the 63% of the complaints really are. Is it because we've got more women who are in care? Is it because the John factor, where it's a man, he's not going to complain, a bit more stoicism, we're not looking after it? Should the figures be higher? What I'm basically saying is there more Davids in the system who we're not looking to, and that's why the figures are so much lower for men as opposed to women?
No, thank you for that question. I think it's a really important question, because actually when I first looked at this, I actually couldn't necessarily answer that. So we are looking further into some of those aspects. Now, it is quite nationally, actually, women are far more likely to face abuse and neglect. So nationally, across the board. So it's not necessarily an underreporting from a man's perspective, but it is something that we should consider, as in the same way if we were to look at the sort of diverse from a sort of ethnicity perspective as well, and from a cultural perspective, you will see that our percentages don't really align either with our population in certain areas. So there is definitely work we need to do to make our information as accessible as we can to different groups, including men, and then also further on from that. But one of the other aspects of it is that you are more likely, if you're a woman, to be in care as you get older, because you're more likely to live longer. So these aspects do actually play into the fact that women are more likely to be abused, and older women are more likely to face abuse or neglect, sadly. But we do still need to be doing some more work around that. So I've asked for some sort of comparators to be brought out more for us from a Staffordshire perspective, to be looking at what we feel our local populations are, so we can start making this comparison more locally based rather than just as a county as a whole, to start to help us to be able to get that accessible information out there as well. As John has said, we've got at the next board, we're looking at hidden abuse, and actually some of these are those aspects that we will need to be pulling out in those discussions. So we need to understand our data a bit more. The other thing that I will state here is I have identified a number of gaps in our reporting still. We are getting better, but when we then apportion where abuses may be occurring, that might actually not be a true reflection. So we're working on that in the background. So we have reduced those percentages, but I always think we need that to be as near to 100% as we can possibly get it. So you've got really true, accurate recording, an idea as to where we're at, which should then hopefully help us to be able to address any of those inaccessible areas that we might not be currently reaching.
Thank you for that. Councillor Wilcox.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon all. John, one of the things that you bring out in your forward is the fact that there needs to be a better understanding of safeguarding partners and the people who take on the service, the recipients of it. And I just wonder how the partners are going to put that in practice of actually getting better engagement with the people who you're delivering a service to. And then secondly, on the training analysis and needs, and brilliant that you're using the story of Andrew to highlight the concerns you have. I just wondered, as part of that training analysis, whether or not you sort of create mock-up practical sessions where you give a scenario to a particular group of people, partners, and say, this is your situation, how would you deal with it? In order to learn and actually have some first-hand experience of dealing with an issue that perhaps could have come out of the situation with Andrew, and whether, if you do that, sort of how regularly are you sort of looking at the training opportunities and needs and learning from these tragic situations that happen. Thank you, Chair.
In relation to your first point about the people who've gone through the service, there is a focus within our effective practice priority around making safeguarding personal. And this is one of the areas when I talk about as a recurring issue. And I noted our colleagues from the children's world were saying similar. It is difficult, it's very difficult to actually get meaningful information from people who've been through a safeguarding process. And again, if you think about the sort of people we're talking about here, Ruth already alluded, you know, some of those people don't have capacity. So they're working through advocates. So there is something about recognising there is a particular challenge for gathering that information. But it's an area we certainly are focusing on. It certainly features in the preparatory work that the local authority have been doing for their CQC assessment. I personally have been involved with a couple of meetings where the work that's going on to actually better evidence experiences. So my response to you is that by the time of our next annual report, I would like to think that we'll be able to reflect some of that, undoubtedly through a case study, because that's the way we actually tell the stories. But we'd want something which is representative of a much broader approach to gathering that information in, rather than a one-off. So that's what we're seeking to do at the moment. And at this point, I would say it is particularly helpful that the work has been going on for the CQC assessment, because it has certainly sharpened up the focus around this particular area. So no pressure, Ruth, but we look forward to some good constructive case studies that follow from that. Do you want to just pick up from those other points, particularly that training?
Sure. So just from a Staffordshire County Council perspective, we have introduced a pilot of trying to get feedback from adults with lived experience. It is really difficult, particularly when people have experienced abuse and neglect, to find the right time and the right way of doing that. I'm actually having a meeting tomorrow where we're looking at actually how we're going to approach some aspects of that as well going forward, so we can better evidence that. And that's something that we've been doing across all of our services to try and get better feedback. It's always been the missing link in our sort of in our learning cycle, that we look at our own practice. We do a bit of, I'll say, navel gazing. That might be sound a bit wrong, but we audit our own work. We reflect on that. We might get other agencies, but actually we haven't been very good at that. But I am really encouraged that we have got such a focus now on learning from feedback from the adults themselves. So I think, as John has said, hopefully when I sit here next year, you will feel a bit more assured that we've been getting that. With regards to learning and development, so when I look at this, say, from a board perspective, although they're not, funded in that sense to provide training opportunities, that's not part of their function. So I see that as being our function within the local authority. We put on the learning events as a board following on from a SAR, but the ongoing training, as I think you've described, is certainly ours. So we have we have sessions called learning circles, where people come in and we do exactly as you said, which is a case study. Practitioners talk that through. It's very much it certainly isn't a test. It's very much them to discuss their feelings, their thoughts on how their key lines of inquiry would happen. But the one area that we found doesn't always get the focus it needs in those is around some of those aspects of safeguarding. So we are putting on particular safeguarding learning events and forums. They're now scheduled in starting later on this month. So there'll be monthly ones of those where people will come, discuss issues related to safeguarding on a particular topic. They'll be sent a case beforehand. They'll then think that through and bring their thoughts to that session to try and help people to be able to develop their practice around that and help them to explore that, some of those aspects of professional curiosity, what would other people be doing, and also then hopefully improve their learning. So that should hopefully pick up on some of those areas. That is specific to us in the local authority.
Could I add to that? In more recent times, and this was again, we're very, very practitioner focused. As a direct consequence, we've added a practitioners forum into our structure, and that is very much led by our practitioners. We have a very broad range of practitioners. We have those like Ruth's team who are dealing with the very high risk safeguarding situations, to those people who work in voluntary sectors who occasionally may come across. So we've got quite a big range of people and their involvement in safeguarding. That includes the Police, Fire Service, West Midlands Ambulance Service, etc., etc. So this practitioners forum is open to everybody, including the independent sector, and they very much lead the topics. So we will also say, as a result of a safeguarding adult review, we want to do a topic on this. We're also responsive to what's happening nationally, and we did a managing allegations one following the Lucy Letby scenario in the late summer. And one of the things that people have asked for is, let's go back to basics. Let us really understand. So sometimes it's hard to put your hand up and say, you all talk about it, but I'm not really sure I know what you mean. So one of the future ones we're going to do is back to basics. And that may not include your team because that's their bread and butter, but we will get some of those occasional people who are in contact. And that gives a natural opportunity for people to say, what about this situation? And then you get that multi-agency conversation. So, I mean, I wouldn't say there are hundreds of things, but there are occasional situational cases where people say, I've experienced this, how could I have done better? So there is the capability, small numbers though.
Thank you for that. Can I just three questions about the data, if I could. Starting off on page 102, locations of abuse. There seems to be 20% missing in Stoke-on-Trent. So is there another place of abuse somewhere that isn't recorded? I know that is more of an issue for Stoke-on-Trent, but I think there's probably some learning within that. The second question as well is the chart on page 103. And I think very often there's nothing more discouraging. When we were talking about encouraging people to put their hand up and say something isn't right here and something needs to be done. Presumably 83% of referrals have no action taken against them. I think it's 17% are the ones that are investigated. And later on in the report, it talks about Stoke-on-Trent are doing some work about what happens to the 83%. I just wondered if we're doing anything similar here, So we have, an understanding, because someone must have raised a concern around them. And like I said, there's nothing more discouraging, is there, than raising a concern only. Very quickly people will say, well, nothing gets done, nothing happens. So what happens there? And the last point is on the chart on page 108. And it goes back to this concern that you have about hidden abuse and underreporting. If you look at there, the breakdown, the ethnic breakdown, if you are white British, to a degree you're overrepresented, aren't you, in the number of inquiries that are made. If you are not white British, and I can't see an example, you are significantly underrepresented in the number of inquiries that are made. And I do wonder, is there any connection between that and the stats on page 102 that show that locations of abuse in the home, in Stoke-on-Trent, I know this is an issue for Stoke-on-Trent, not necessarily for us, but it's, half of what Staffordshire's is. Is there some concern there about the fact that there does seem to be, should we be looking more towards potential hidden abuse in certain ethnic minority groups? And the last thing I'll make about the data is it's really encouraging to see that those people who've not recorded, or where it hasn't been recorded, has reduced from nearly 10% down to 4.5%. But 4.5% is still more than any of the other groups. So if that 4.5% fell into one of those ethnic minority groups, it would make that even worse, wouldn't it? So I do wonder, A, where's the missing 20%? Are we doing anything about the 83% that aren't investigated? And is this business around hidden abuse, is that evidenced, in inverted commas, on your ethnicity chart? And finally, what are we doing to make sure that we've got all of that data right? As encouraging as 4.5% is, surely someone, when they're filling out a form, must have an opportunity. I know if the individual doesn't want to self-identify, then is there not, for data purposes, an issue around ethnicity?
Chair, just a very minor point. The not recorded for Staffordshire is 2.2. The 4.5 does relate to Stoke. But in terms of where are the missing numbers, you refer to page 102. That talks about the top 4 locations. So there will be other locations. It's just the top 4 just happen to be as they are. I think the...
Staffordshire's adds up to 100%, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Staffordshire's is in those 4.
Yeah.
It's just this missing significant 20%, and it would be useful to know where that is.
Yeah, the discussion obviously was picked up at Stoke, as you would expect. And this is partly to do with the interpretation of where people see their home. So that is essentially, without getting too complicated about it, it is about that. And there is a difference in the recording systems between Stoke and Staffordshire. They don't use the same system. But we certainly did cover that at Stoke, as you would expect them to have done. I think, Ruth, you need to perhaps pick up where the missing numbers are, etc. Those supplementary questions.
Mm-hmm. So I think first and foremost, I'll answer the very good question around the sort of 80-odd% that look like they've had nothing done. So what we've very similar to Stoke-on-Trent insofar as just because somebody doesn't meet the need for a Section 42 inquiry, quite often that's because maybe the risk has been reduced, removed, or that there was no abuse identified on reviewing that information. They will quite often lead to other outcomes. So, for example, things as a review of the current support plan that they've got in place. We may have signposted them to voluntary services. They may have gone over to a health service, for example, or over to the police for a single agency sort of police investigation. When I did when I did audits, and when the audits are being done by the team now, when we always audit at least, you know, at least I think it's 10 cases now that have been closed a month. That have been closed with apparently not requiring a Section 42, just to make sure that that decision making is clear at that time, and that actually any appropriate steps have been taken. So in actual fact, it's very rare for nothing to happen. So actually, you know, I know that that's actually a very low percentage where actually we've done nothing further with that. It may be, you know, as I say, that we should next year provide a bit more detail around that, just to offer that assurance. I think that would most probably be beneficial from that perspective. With regards to the location of abuse, this is one of those areas that I have asked for some further information about, because this has been an interesting conversation over a number of years as to why our own home is so much higher than actually as well. If you look at us across the country as well, we do appear to be a bit higher, that abuse is more likely to occur in your own home. So that's being looked at the moment, and I think some of that is where, I know as you've pointed out, and John kindly said our figures where they're at the moment, actually even 2% for me is still quite a lot of information in certain areas, and actually location of abuse is the one that seems to be missed most frequently. So some of those that actually are within own home is because an assumption has been made from a percent. I didn't understand all of this. This was people who deal with in our performance that explain this. So where they, I'll say fill in the blanks, that's how easily I remember. So they looked at it from a percentage perspective based on the data we've got available. So some of that could be relevant to that. So I've asked for that to be looked into so that we can understand that. Because again, that's relevant in the points that you made around the ethnicity of people and the underrepresentation of those. As I said earlier, for me, that's a real key area that we have to be looking into. We know nationally that the people who reside outside of, say, a white ethnic group are underreported nationally within safeguarding. So for those communities, so our black, our ethnic, and other minority ethnic groups, for me, that's for us to address, because I don't think our information is accessible. It's not just as straightforward as putting information into the right language. There's a lot more to how we work with groups and with different communities in the right way to engage them better, and that's something that we are looking at and something that we need to be doing more of, and has come out through our preparation for CQC, and we've had some really helpful support from some other county councillors actually who have heard us at other committees, who have offered support to help us be able to address some of those community issues.
Thank you. Can I just have one other point as well about the number of investigations? Am I right, as the report explains here, the criteria for an investigation, and I'm oversimplifying now, but is that there is abuse, but you're either able or unable to defend yourself from it. So if we assume that the majority, or there is an overrepresentation of women being abused, are we accepting that abuse if at the time we think that the woman is able to defend herself? I've oversimplified there, but you get the point. So are we accepting a situation that is abusive because we've made a decision that someone is able to defend themselves?
So from a Section 42 perspective, somebody has to you know, it's for our duty is when somebody is unable to protect themselves from that abuse and neglect. That doesn't mean that we say no abuse or neglect has occurred. That would potentially be looked at as that they're able to protect themselves. Now, quite often that does seem to fall into the situations of, say, domestic abuse. So for us, there is work, and there are situations that I think are very difficult, because if you think about control and coercion and other aspects of that, ability to protect yourself isn't just your physical ability to protect yourself, but actually people have a right as well not to have our involvement. So whilst we have a duty to make those inquiries, sometimes actually, particularly in those situations of domestic abuse, people will make a decision not to have our involvement. Now, we still have a duty then under the Care Act, I'm going to bore you all now, with under Section 11 that we should still be completing that assessment, we should still be offering them advice and guidance, and that we should actually make sure that they have ways to be able to contact us again should they need to. And those are the things that we have to make sure are happening. But again, I say, this comes down to us being able to be more accessible to people. There is a stigma attached to having a social worker involved, particularly, you know, for some people, unfortunately. I think, you know, we're great people, but obviously, you know, we can understand why people might have those concerns. So it is around how we can work better with our partner agencies, more effectively with agencies that might be more acceptable to people, that people may feel better to engage with. And I think that those are the aspects that we're sort of trying to, you know, sort of work on with that. So now that's sort of a bit of a long-winded answer, but it would be hard for me to say that we would accept abuse just because it was a woman if she was able to defend herself, because our duty to be involved is dependent on as to whether they're able to protect themselves or not as well.
I still think that sounds like we accept a certain amount of abuse if people are able to defend them. I mean, I remember in the police force, and domestic violence was the best example, of course, is that people wanted them hung, drawn and quartered when it happened during the night. The following morning, they'd withdraw the charge and everything else, and there was a revolving door, and the police force took the decision, rightly or wrongly, that of having sort of no victim prosecutions and a whole host of things, and they made that stance that no abuse is acceptable. It just strikes me, and I read this, that we add this strange caveat that you can suffer abuse if someone thinks that you're able to defend yourself from it. It just seems an odd thing to put in. I accept if it's law and national, then fine.
I would certainly not say that we're accepting of abuse for anyone. I think that that would be, well, certainly inhumane, wouldn't it, to say that we're accepting of abuse. As I say, in the same way that everybody has the right as well to a private life, we have to balance people's rights. It's very complex and very difficult. I like to think, and actually we have some evidence to suggest that we will engage people, even when, particularly where there's high risk of abuse, that we will work alongside our agencies, particularly the police from a domestic abuse situation, to support them and to look for ways that we can engage with them. And I would never say that just because somebody has been able to defend themselves or protect themselves, because it's not about defence, it's that protection, as a result of abuse, as a result of care needs, if they have those care needs, those needs for care and support, that even if they can, we would not look at it a second time. So I've got evidence to show that where abuse has repeated, where we felt that they've had the ability to protect themselves, we will then make those inquiries the next time. It is a bit different, I suppose, maybe to children's safeguarding, where all children fall under the safeguarding remit of the local authority. For us, it is those adults who have needs for care and support, where we have that duty. But where we find we don't have a duty, I do believe that we signpost people to relevant agencies that would be able to support them appropriately.
Thank you for that. Councillor McMahon.
This is a follow-on from what the chair's raised, but it's the other side of the coin. Because I recall last year we discussed the fact that you're at risk of becoming a triage service as well as a safeguarding service. Mm-hmm. Because there was so much stuff that was coming through the door. I mean, it's interesting that the concerns have gone up, but the Section 42s haven't. And you highlighted there were certain organisations that perhaps were a bit trigger-happy in referring people to you, and that you were going to approach them sensitively and see what could be done such that their referral patterns might change. It's not a question of saying these people don't merit a referral. They clearly do, but it's not a safeguarding referral. There's other issues going on. And I just wonder how well you've got on with that, because that would mitigate some of your concerns, and it would also save a great deal of time and effort for people when if the referral was made to the appropriate agency in the first place. There'd be less work for you guys, and you could actually concentrate on the people who really need the help.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And we have been working alongside, if I start with our providers, so we've done a lot of work with our provider services to help them to explore when concerns are of a safeguarding nature or of a quality nature. So the majority of our safeguarding concerns are raised by providers, so by care homes and by care agencies. So they do generate quite a number of those referrals, as you've referred to, where we've got quite a high, where our number of inquiries haven't gone up, but actually we've continued to increase. So a lot of those maybe come from our providers. And what we've done is we've worked alongside our colleagues in commissioning, and we have put lots of advice, guidance, tools that are available to them on the MyDOS platform, which is a platform that's accessed by providers. And in doing that, we have had some real positive responses. Engaging with CQC at the moment to bring them into those discussions, because quite a lot of the time providers refer because CQC tell them that they need to refer. A number of those issues, particularly falls medication errors, for example, which we may not need to know or may not be the right people to address to make sure that they get to the right point. I haven't been quite so successful with our colleagues in West Midlands Ambulance Service, but I remain ever hopeful that will improve over time. It's an interesting conversation, and actually I take some of their points, and the more I speak with them, the more I understand the difficult position that they are in as well. So it's a real difficult sort of balance, isn't it? I am really conscious of us being able to deal with things in a timely way, and we are in a much better position now as a local authority, which hopefully at a later committee I will be able to update you more fully on the position that we're in, where we are now able to spend the time in the right way. The other thing we're in the process of developing is the online referral form, which will actually help people to direct that in the right direction. So if you answer questions in a certain way, you're going to get, directed to the right point. But we will still have a record of that information, so we can check that to make sure that we don't need to take any further action as well, so we don't miss any issues of abuse and neglect.
Thank you. I think the last question, Councillor Pardeshi.
Just very quickly, Chair, on the point that you made about the revolving door and women who are being abused, calling the police and then deciding they don't want anything done. Just to make the point that the fundamental issue is that when a lot of women are abused, they want the abuse to end, but they don't necessarily want the relationship to end. So that's why we end up in that situation. I just wanted to clarify that.
Good point.
Thank you for that, and I think you're absolutely right. But it gets us into that area that we've just, and I won't go over it again, but we then, as a society, start to accept a level of abuse, don't we? And we think, And I take the point about everyone has a right, but all intervention is a breach of human rights, isn't it? It's about proportionality. It's about how we move forward with that. And these things are always, well, they're not fine, but it's fine until something happens, isn't it? And then someone should have done something. Then we have 308 visits, 11 organisations. That's where it comes from. I think just to sum up, though, unlike the uncomfortable feelings I had at the last report, I hope everyone agrees. I think this is a very encouraging picture. John, thank you very much for putting it together. I enjoyed reading through the good news stories. I thought they do demonstrate how we've moved forward and that commitment and passion that people have for getting that particular job done and safeguarding vulnerable people. It would be nice to have seen some where it didn't work and we learnt lessons from it, because all of these good news stories, they always end well, don't they? It is so it would be useful to see where perhaps it hasn't worked and we've learnt a lesson and we've changed things. I think going back right to the question that I asked right at the very beginning, when you were talking about the big question, do we have the evidence to say that we've made change? And you make change usually because things go wrong, don't you? Not because things go right. So, but all in all, I think it's really encouraging. Thank you for coming along and answering the questions. And I certainly feel much more comfortable about adults than I do about children at the moment. John, were you...
Chair, can I first... Sorry, Mike. I'm not sure where the croaky voices come from. Just to thank the committee for your questions and comments. It is very important to us that we have a functioning scrutiny committee who, first of all, reads the report and then asks us some meaningful and relevant questions which we go away with. And I would say without any fear that our annual report has improved over the years as a result of the feedback that we've had from scrutiny processes. I can assure you that we do go back. In fact, it's on our January board to feedback how we've gone with the scrutiny processes. So I'm really, really grateful for the time that you put into this report and not giving us just 4 minutes when the clock stopped. So that's really important. And it's just to say that this is my last committee. I've been 8 years now. Can't believe I've been long as 8 years as chair. But I just thank you personally for the way that you and your predecessors have received us when we've come along with this report, because we've always felt that it's been a very worthwhile experience to come along. And hopefully you feel that in a similar sort of way. So thank you very much.
Very much thank you. I think Councillor Wilcox was in first.
Just in anticipation of what you just said, John, I just think as a board we ought to publicly acknowledge the work that John has done over that period of time and minute it so that our appreciation of the work he's done, albeit I've only seen it for a year and a bit or two, but I'm sure many of the others around this table have known John longer, so thank you on behalf of that.
You've got the last word.
John, I think I was here for your first report. So can I say thank you? I think Connor was as well. Yeah, the two of us were there for your first report. Yeah, so on behalf of the two of us, thank you for the way it's progressed over the years to the report is today. So thank you very much.
Thank you for sticking with us as well. I intended to finish at 12:30, so there you go. Yeah. Thanks again. Can we just have a couple of minutes on the work programme once our visitors have left?
Yep. Thank you, Chair. I'm conscious it's very late, and I just very briefly want to mention at the last meeting, members asked that we had feedback on the Ofsted review. It's not out until the 12th of January. We were going to put it on our 15th of February meeting, and I've been asked whether or not we can put it back so that they're able to bring it to committee with a sensible plan. The only problem we have is that you haven't got a meeting in March, you're not meeting till April. Would members like me to try and put an extra meeting in March for that, or do you think April is okay?
I think I have had sight of this report. I don't want to go into detail, but I do think that we need to give them time to come up with a proper plan and not rushed. Yeah, I'm more than happy to do it in March if people... I am reluctant to keep adding meetings in because we're busy enough anyway. I wonder whether we go for April, unless people have got a real objection. And I think then it gives them a little bit extra, because I do think that that report will need some serious scrutiny as we move forward.
So at the moment, on the April meeting, you've got scheduled in an item on the domestic abuse contract, 6 months on, adult vulnerability hubs and adult safeguarding assessment, but I might be able to see if I can move one of those into February.
Just on a very last point as well, I do think maybe just ask you to give some thought. The children's report was very concerning. As we move forward, I do think there's some urgency. I don't want answers now, but maybe on a postcard or an email about how you feel we ought to be taking that forward, because I feel distinctly uncomfortable about where we are with that. We're going to try to pull a couple of those things together behind the scenes in the next couple of weeks, but any suggestions would be welcome about how we drive that forward with a little bit more urgency, I think. Thank you again.